Holy crap.
People persist in doubting the evidence.
Don't run and hide. Don't be afraid. Don't turn away any longer. The truth will set you free.
You're listening to Jimmy Church Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
We're turning all of our antennas towards Jimmy Church on Dark Matter Radio.
And now, your host, the captain of conspiracy, the prince of paranormal. This ain't your daddy's radio network show. This is Jimmy Church, Fade to Black.
Hey, how you doing? How you doing? How you doing? It's Monday. You know what that means. Fresh as a daisy. Welcome everyone across the United States, around the world. This is Fade to Black, bespoke radio for the masses. Today is Monday, September 29th. It's a very special day around here. We are 271 days into the new year. If you follow that Gregorian calendar like most of you do. We are live from the JP Motorsports Studios right here in Burbank, California for KJCR and the Dark Matter Radio Network. I am your humble host, Jimmy Church. Welcome. It's good to be back. 3 days off, and you just get the itch. I'm serious, dude. So cool to be back with the family. Big salute to the proud men and women in uniform all around the world fighting the good fight for us. Without them, there is no me, there is no you, there is no us. Defending that Constitution of ours. Think about it. Laying it all out every single day. Yeah. Without them, the show doesn't exist. You couldn't tweet, text, make a phone call. Nothing would happen. Podcast up and running. If you are listening to my voice, it's all updated and good. Go subscribe to the podcast. For all of you that want to listen over the weekend, your drive time into work every single day, whatever. Podcast is cool. JimmyChurchRadio.com. There is a podcast page right there for your enjoyment. Go and subscribe. Okay, today, not yesterday, today, bassist Les Claypool is 51 years old. And that is one of the wackest guys out there. Love Les. Crazy dude. Actor Ian McShane is 72 years old today. And I had to peel back the memory on Ian. He used to live next door to Rita and I down in Venice Beach. Ian McShane, his best role, I'll tell you, his creepiest role was in that movie Sexy Beast. And if you've never seen it, check it out. Because I got to tell you, Ian will creep you out in that movie. That's a good one. Also today, comedian Andrew Dice Clay, 57 years old. And the man, the king, Jerry Lee Lewis, 79 years old. Jerry Lee Lewis. All right. I was told, I'm going to behave and do this. I was told to give a big shout out to Fade or Not, Stephanie. There it is. Everybody say hi to Stephanie. What's her Twitter handle? She changed it, right? Isn't it? What's her new Twitter handle? Twitter is lighting up. I cannot keep up with it. It's that is a phenomenon. Follow us on Twitter at JChurchRadio and hashtag DMRadioNet is what you want to do. Come hang out in the sandbox. Come hang out in the sandbox. Get down. What is Stephanie's new? I'm looking. Stephanie Connor. There it is, right there. Okay. Used to be like Sakana. All right, Stephanie, you got your shout out. Facebook is jimmychurchradio.com. That's the fan page. You can go over to my personal page if you want to. You can chase that down. And YouTube, always on fire. Yeah, always on fire. Everything's Fade to Black, J Church Radio. You know what to do. Go follow, like, and subscribe. Get her done. Get her done. Tonight, Peter Levenda on the show tonight, the Secret Space program. And Peter disappeared. And we'll talk about that. But we found him. And tonight, he will be joining us. And we're going to discuss, he's got a really, really cool presentation that he did a couple of years ago around the world called the Secret Space Program. And we're going to go through that tonight, amongst other things. But we're going to go through that tonight because it's one of the best presentations, the amount of research and the connecting of the dots that he has done. He is second to none as far as researchers go. And a tough guy to chase down. We've got him on the program tonight. And time constraints, if we can get to it, I would love for everybody to chime in and give Peter a call tonight and ask anything that you'd like. We will see what we can do. He's got so much to cover. And the way that he presents in such a fashion, I was talking to him earlier today, and he's able to get this information out in such a way that he goes, he doesn't skip. I guess it's a linear fashion how he does it, and he starts at the beginning and ends at the end, and it's really cool. So hopefully, I'll be able to grab a taste, a little germ of that magic that he does in one of his presentations, and we can present it here tonight. It is an amazing presentation, so we will be doing that. You can email throughout the show, Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com. Go over to jimmychurchradio.com if you'd like, and go to the contact page where you can email. Everything goes through the producers here. You know that. If it's good, it's a good question, it's a good point, then it eventually will make it in here to me. I try to respond to every email. I do. I really do. I sometimes I don't get around to all of it the same day, but I eventually do get around to everything. All right? So Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com. All right? I want to thank Method. Method has been working really hard. I want to thank Dale Romero, working really, really hard on our graphics here. This stuff is just incredible. And again, a big shout out to both of those guys. They really, really bust tail. All right? And also, Ken, your pen is beyond anything. It is incredible. So there you go. I just wanted to squeeze that in. All right? Peter Levenda tonight. Incredible. Also, don't forget, over on TweetDeck, I've got a hashtag F2BQ. That's Fade to Black Questions. That's its own column. If you want to shoot something to me during the show, do it there. I will see that first. That is uncluttered. Okay, so if you have a question for me or for Peter or anything else, and you want to get it to me directly, hashtag F2BQ is what you'll want to do. All right? Oh, also, Lauren Robb sent us a Fader Night movie intro thing, and I'm going to be using that from now on YouTube. Very cool, and I watched that so many times. It is just unbelievable. All right, so let's see. I think I've got everything set. Saturday, I was over with Carrie Cassidy and Sean David Morton at their seminar by the Conscious Life Seminars this past Saturday at the LAX Hilton. Great crowd, and I was completely humbled when she introduced me, and I went up and I had everybody raising, who listens to the show, and everybody raised their hand. Like, what? Really? Who knows about the Malibu Bays? Everybody's hand shot up. And I just got to say thank you to both of them for getting me out there. It was pretty cool hanging out with everybody and shaking hands and talking. It was a really great experience. So thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Sean. Very interesting presentations by the both of them. And a pretty good lunch, too, as well. So thank you for that. Okay. Now, like I said, tonight, Peter Levenda. Tomorrow night, Dr. Heather Lynn. Lost civilizations, all that stuff. My favorite subject. Well, besides time travel. Tomorrow night. Going to be really cool. And Wednesday, Freeman will be back with us. Freeman and I today set up the show for Wednesday. We've got some really cool stuff that we're going to be doing on Wednesday. Then, after the show, after Fade to Black on Wednesday night, I'll be on Coast to Coast with George Norrie. He invited us on and wanted to talk about the Malibu Bays and a couple of other things. So that's Wednesday night. It's going to be pretty cool. So there you go. So that's the week set up here at Fade to Black. It's going to be pretty crazy, pretty fun. Looking forward to all of it. What was I going to get to? Oh, you know what? Let's go ahead and take our first break. I've got a couple of emails I wanted to get to. Let's get to that and a couple of headlines. The world just kind of blew up over the weekend, didn't it? Kind of strange. Okay, let me get to one email before the break. This is from Debbie. She says, this is half of her email, by the way. She says, I just listened to Grant Cameron, episode 127. Good stuff as always. He mentioned Wilbur Smith and the AFFA, but if you didn't press him further, Dr. Wilbur Smith, with the help of telepathy and other contactees, were given a lot of downloads. This started when many were receiving messages via the radio telegraph in 1952, the year of the mass sightings over D.C., and also the one shot over Florida, and the one that landed until repaired in Flatwoods, West Virginia. Remember me requesting Frank Ficino Jr., who pieced a lot of this together for a guest? Well, I think 1952 may have been the ET's first attempt at disclosure. That's a great email, Debbie, and I'm going to get into all of that. I think I'm with you. 1947 and 1952, 2 key years. All right, here's another email from Klaatu. It says, came across a web article that I mentioned last week about the Romans adding a sweet lead to their food as to what really poisoned them. The reason lead pipes, and you remember this on last week's show, the reason lead pipes didn't bother people much, or any lead may have been used by the Romans as joints in their aqueducts, is that plain lead metal is quite inert. Also, water pipes develop a calcium coating on the inside that prevents the water from leaching lead from the pipe, which is on top of it, being inert and not likely to react much with the water flowing by. I once took a tour of an old lead mine in Bonne Terre, Missouri. Yes, that's Missouri, not Montana. As a kid in the late 1970s. It was pretty cool, and since they turned off the pumps, the water pumps, they had seeped into the lower levels of the mine. Even though the rock was lead ore, the water was incredibly pure. In fact, from back then and to this day still, they offer scuba diving in the mine. It's considered one of the most dangerous forms of scuba diving because it's so easy to get lost in the horizontal tunnels, and you can't just float up to the top once your air supply runs out. Sometime back in the late 70s or early 80s, Jacques Cousteau did a National Geographic special in that mine because it is such a hardcore scuba experience. I think he even commented on the clarity of the water, and I doubt that the Cousteau team would have just done a regular scuba dive if it was hazardous. Thank you, Klaatu, for that. I got to love this Fade or Not audience. So smart. So smart. This is Fade to Black. Tonight, it's Peter Levenda at the bottom of the hour. Tomorrow, Dr. Heather Lynn. And Wednesday, it's Freeman, kids. Back in the house. This is Fade to Black. Follow us on Twitter at JChurchRadio. That's what you want to do. Hashtag DMRadioNet. Shoot me an email to Jimmy at JimmyChurchRadio.com. When I come back, I got a little audio I'm going to play you. It's pretty cool. I'll be back right after this. Stay with us.
You're listening to Jimmy Church Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, you have tuned into the latest phenomenon in late night talk radio, Fade to Black, starring the inimitable Jimmy Church, showcasing his continuing quest in pursuit of knowledge of the strange and paranormal. Sit back, open your mind, and let's get cracking.
What's up, revolutionaries? It's me, Jimmy Church. Do you have an IRS or state tax issue? Well, I did, and I called national tax experts. My problems were fixed, done, fini, and man, I got to tell you, it was a relief. National Tax Experts are a recognized tax office that services clients in all 50 states. Doesn't matter where you live. Give them a call. I'm telling you, they take the time to understand each and every client's individual financial status as well as their financial goals. And that's exactly what you need, my brother, when you're taking on the evil three-letter. So, seriously, give them a call today at 1-877-909-5444. Again, 1-877-909-5444. Or go check out their website, www.nattaxexperts.com. That's NATTAXEXPERTS.com. Tell them Jimmy sent you.
This is KJCR at JimmyChurchRadio.com.
On the Dark Matter Radio Network.
Yeah, welcome back. Fade to Black. Monday. Love Monday. Oh. Best day of the week. I know everybody else, you got to go back to work. For me, it's hanging out with all of you. Love it. Never, ever, ever forget that. All right. I'm your humble host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. It is Monday. Bottom of the hour. Few minutes. Peter Levenda will be joining us, the Secret Space Program. Crazy weekend around the world. That armed intruder that made it into the White House, it turns out he didn't only make it through the front door, made it into the East Room. How does that happen? You know, why? I would never go down at the Kremlin, ever. Why isn't there just like dogs roaming and guards walking around in the grass like every 2 or 3 minutes, 5, 10 of them? I mean, how is that possible to make it through? And what's the door doing unlocked? The front door to the White House is unlocked. I don't get that. Really don't. And then we have that volcano erupted in Japan over the weekend. And now Mount St. Helens seems to be gurgling. That's crazy. Is there a connection there? I'm sure we can connect that dot. And also over the weekend, I kind of mentioned this before, but posted in the Project Avalon forum was a post about from Joseph Farrell and a couple of other people about Peter Levenda gone missing. And I'm going to have Peter talk about that tonight. He's alive and well. He'll be joining us. Also, ISIS on the run. Oops, apparently not. They're about to take a major city on the Turkish border with Syria. How does that? It's crazy. How is that possible with all of the technology that we have probing over Syria right now, that we can have armed columns of ISIS troops just sneak up and grab a city? How is that? Somebody help me. Please help me. Over at truthfall.com. Love that website, by the way. It's one word, TRUTHFALL, truthfall.com. It's a really cool article on the Baltic anomaly and what's going on under the water there. And the title of it, the headline is Far Stranger Than Any UFO Discovery. And they've got a bunch of their sonar research there with the pictures. You've got to go check that out. I was going to spend a bunch of time on that tonight, but I just ran out of time. So that will be a future show, though. We've got to get deep into the Baltic anomaly, and especially with the Malibu base. And I think it is a great subject. Also, you remember last week when I talked about internet trolls are narcissists from Psychology Today. They're narcissists, psychopaths, and sadists. How they get satisfaction out of seeing somebody else get hurt or trying to. And today I have concluded, yes, they are. If you have a story and you want the world to know, email us through jimmychurchradio.com, tweet us at jchurchradio, find us on Facebook. We can't do all the research by ourselves. If there's anything out there, you're probing the papers. Renee in Tucson sends me 10 articles a day. And that, my friends, I'm not kidding about. Now, here we go. I'm going to play this. This was done by Ken. And this is the Malibu base spoof. I've listened to this 10 times.
This is Jim
Check it
Edwards
out.
with Internet Science News. Today, we're broadcasting live about 6 miles out to sea from the shores of Malibu, where Jimmy Church, the host of the radio show Fade to Black, and his so-called Fadernauts are out here determined to investigate what he calls the underwater Malibu base. From my location, anchored about 100 feet away on the Internet Science News boat, I could see Jimmy Church on the back deck of the ship called Fadernaut 1 as they lower the submersibles into the water in preparation for sending them down to the underwater base. What's interesting to note is a few moments ago, what looks like a Navy destroyer has arrived on the scene and appears to be holding position several miles away. While the ship isn't taking any aggressive action at this time, there is a boat approaching at high speed from the Malibu area. With my binoculars, I could see a man standing on the front deck of that boat. He has dark hair, mustache. Hold on, that's George Norrie from Coast to Coast AM. Standing beside George is a gray-haired man with a beard that looks like... That's Richard C. Hoagland, the man famous for his discovery of alien bases on the moon. Could it be that they're showing up here just in time to share in whatever discoveries are made by Jimmy Church and his team of investigators? The skipper of the Science News boat is telling me that we've just begun receiving transmissions from the Navy destroyer. It appears that we're being ordered out of this restricted area as well as the other boats. It seems that no one is taking that warning very seriously. The Coast to Coast AM boat is still speeding this direction while Jimmy Church and his crew members have just completed lowering the submersibles into the water. On the back deck of the ship Fader Not 1, I see several people dressed in wetsuits who are going into the water at this time. It looks like Jimmy Church himself is going in to finish readying the submersibles. And there's a female. Could that be Rita Kamarian, Jimmy Church's executive producer, going in to help? Also, it looks like Gene and Leslie going into the water while Allison Bell is handing down some equipment to them. The skipper here is telling me that the Navy is getting a little more serious with their warnings. They are now threatening to remove us physically if we do not depart the area. But still, it doesn't appear that anyone here is taking that threat very seriously. The Coast to Coast AM boat is still heading this direction, while Jimmy Church and his crew of Fader Knots go about their business. So we'll stay here too and continue broadcasting live right after this. This is Jim Edwards with Internet Science News.
They thought it was a gamble worth taking. They didn't know how high the stakes were. Trouble was, they were gambling with our lives. In a matter of moments, science would take a turn, a twist, and warp. Project Warp.
We're back live several miles off the Malibu coast, where a Navy destroyer is now threatening to open fire if we don't depart the area. The Coast to Coast AM speedboat is approaching Fader Not 1. It looks like they're going to try to drop anchor a few. What the Navy has just opened fire. A shell has just crashed into the ocean not more than 100 yards away from our position. The Navy has made good on threatening to open fire on us. The Coast to Coast AM speedboat has turned and is heading back toward Malibu. Looks like somebody's in the water. That's Richard Hoagland. Richard Hoagland has jumped into the water and is swimming toward Fader Not 1, while another round has just crashed into the ocean not far away. One of the Fader Knots, it looks like a space boy is reaching into the water. He's pulling Richard Hoagland up to the deck of Fader Not 1. For the moment, the guns have gone silent on the destroyer. It appears to be turning. Oh my! There's something coming up out of the water just beyond the destroyer to its rear. It looks like a large triangular object, and it's coming out of the water and floating up behind the destroyer. The destroyer is turning its guns, and it looks like about to open fire on the object that is now, there's a bright light coming out from the base of the object and is engulfing the destroyer. The destroyer just fired, but that seems to have little effect on the object. That now the destroyer is glowing a bright orange color, and it's sinking into the ocean itself. My God, the humanity, all the sailors have just gone down with the destroyer. Now the triangle, the black triangle, is now moving toward us, toward Fader Not 1, and it's lowering down to the water level. It looks like it's going into the water right near Fader Not 1. I see Jimmy Church running over to the side of the ship. The top of the triangle is like level with the deck of Fader Not 1. The triangle is about 200 yards across. Wait, there's something. There's a door opening on top of the triangle. There's a creature. It looks amphibian. It's a strange looking creature walking out of top the triangle. It's walking across toward Fader Not 1. I see Jimmy looks like he's trying to make contact with it. Wait a minute. Wait, its mouth is huge. Its mouth is huge. Oh my God! It's just eating Jimmy Church.
Thank you, Brad. That's OG Brad. Had to play that. Makes me laugh every time. This is Fade to Black, only on the Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your humble host, Jimmy Church. When we come back, Peter Levenda will be joining us. Secret Space Program. Stay with us. Do not touch that mouse.
Are you afraid of the dark? Don't move. Don't touch that mouse. You are listening to Fade to Black, bespoke radio for the masses, on jimmychurchradio.com.
Way out here, we listen to Jimmy Church on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
Dark Matter.
Dark Matter, Dark Matter, Dark Matter, Dark Matter.
You're listening to Fade to Black
on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
¿Qué tal, mis amigos? Yo soy Mario Carzón, el tiburón, y los invito para que escuchen a mi buen amigo Jimmy Church Radio. ¡Claro que sí!
Oi, I'm Reese Evans. You're listening to Jimmy Church. This is Revolution. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution is on radio. Ciao.
Fade to Black, Monday. Shoot us an email to Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com. Follow us on Twitter at jchurchradio. That's what you want to do. Hashtag DMRadioNet. Come hang out in the sandbox. All right, let's get this one cracking. Everybody ready? Is everybody ready? Peter Levenda. A native of the Bronx, Peter Levenda has been investigating and writing about the connections that exist between politics, religion, and history since the 1970s. His first book, Unholy Alliance, A History of Nazi Involvement with the Occult, was published in 1994 and bears a foreword by Norman Mailer. Since then, he has published Sinister Forces, a grimoire of American political witchcraft, a 3-volume magnum opus that searches for the meaning behind some of the most famous historical events in American history. From the Salem witchcraft trials to Jonestown, from Operation Paperclip to the weaponizing of the paranormal, from the serial killer phenomenon to the Manson family and beyond, he exposes some of the most strangest aspects of American political assassinations and their relation to a shadowy, yet well-documented group known as the Nine. His research has taken him to Chile through the Pinochet regime to investigate Nazi war criminals, to the Chinese military bases and prisons, Indian and Japanese temples, all over Southeast Asia and throughout Europe and Latin America. His work has been praised by Paul Krasner, Jim Hogan, Dick Russell, Jim Mars, Whitley Strieber, Catherine Neville, and many others. He has appeared numerous times on television documentaries on the influence of occult beliefs, on the development of the Nazi Party, on the History Channel, the National Geographic Channel, TNT, Discovery, etc. Most recently, he's been on Brad Meltzer's Decoded. His latest works on Nazism include Ratline, Soviet Spies, Nazi Priests, and the Disappearance of Adolf Hitler, and the upcoming Hitler Legacy, the Nazi Cult in Diaspora. How it was organized. I have to say, really quick, that was a mouthful, Peter, and I'm going to finish it right now. How it was funded and why it remains a threat to global security in the age of terrorism. Now I'm going to take a breath. Welcome to the program, Mr. Peter Levenda. How are you tonight, sir?
I'm doing well.
Oh, man. Such a pleasure to have chased you down and get you on the program. And before we get started, again, welcome. Where have you been, Peter? The world wants to know.
I realize that, and my apologies to people who have been trying to contact me over the last 6-8 months or longer. I've been traveling constantly. all over the United States and in Europe and in Asia, doing research for the latest book. I've been quite often in places where I had no internet connection at all. And at other times, there were security reasons. I just simply did not respond to a lot of emails because there was some evidence that my email accounts had been hacked or were being observed, as other people can attest as we go along. But there have been these issues, and I have had to lay low for a long time, at least until this latest book was complete, off to the presses, off to the printers, and it's done, and nobody can really stop it right now, short of setting fire to the printer. So I think we're okay.
Well, it's funny because my emails to you got more and more frantic. It's like,
well, there was a lot of frantic emails. I can tell you, people thought I had appeared from the earth or something, and I just could not respond in many cases as much as I would have liked to. It was just impossible.
Well,
as I say, there were security issues too.
Exactly. It's what you write about, and when you do that type of research and the people that you need to make contact with, I can only imagine the dark underbelly of the world where you are going to, and you must feel at times, like Jack Ryan-ish, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, there is an element of living underground in a sense. I mean, you have to meet people. You have to. My work has always been outside. The archives, the libraries are necessary. The documents are essential to the work that I do. But at the same time, I have to go out and meet the people, see these organizations, see the groups for myself, because I can't. I can't trust what people have written. If I really want to get at what's really going on, I have to go and do the work myself and show up in places where, many Americans don't want to show up, in countries where they may be fearful to show up, and talk to people who, don't always have the best intentions towards Americans or towards the West in general, or towards people like me. So yeah, it's a little tricky at times, and I have to be very careful about security issues, just plain and simple. I don't maintain a Facebook page, for instance, for that very reason. There's no point in me saying, "Oh, today I'm meeting a terrorist on this island, in the middle of nowhere. Just here's a picture of my latte." It's not gonna. It's just not, a good idea.
Yeah, I'm sitting at this cafe right now. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. Yeah, open fire.
Yeah.
So no.
Help me out for a second. You and I were talking about your presentation, the Secret Space Program. I think there's probably 3 true definitions of what the Secret Space Program is. There is your presentation in that version. There could be another version of what's going on right now that we don't know about, as far as flights and rockets and so forth. And there's that kind of secret space program. What's your definition of the secret space program?
Well, as I said in Amsterdam, what I was really speaking about was the origins of all of that. You have to go back to the roots of the space program in general to find out maybe where it's going today. For me, the secret space program was a seminal period in American history or world history for that matter, in which, the first rockets were being developed. Back in the 30s, the first attempt to leave the planet, the first attempt to leave our atmosphere, was being worked out on drawing boards and blueprints all over the world. And then that happened just at the time when Hitler was coming to power in Germany, Mussolini in Italy. We had tremendous political upheavals. And during this period of tremendous political upheaval, there were scientists and engineers who were attempting to find ways to fly to the moon and to leave the planet, to develop a space technology in the midst of all of this. The secret space program was born there. It has much more to do than simply space or simply exploration of space. For me, it's connected to so many other things in American and world history, even to the Kennedy assassination, which is, I feel almost embarrassed to bring it up because the Kennedy assassination is such the cliche of conspiracy. And yet the connections to the Kennedy assassination and the space program are so intense that we can't ignore it, and I'm forced to confront it with the danger that maybe people will think I'm wearing a tinfoil hat. But the documents are there. The evidence is there. It's inescapable, as I discussed in Amsterdam. And to me, that's part of the secret space program. The weird assortment of characters, political ideologies, secret agendas, and murder surrounds, the origins of our space program.
We've got a little connection problem with Skype. It's coming and going and choppy. So we're going to continue for a little bit, and we'll see if it resolves itself. If it doesn't, we'll reset that, or we can definitely go switch to a landline on a commercial break. But it's weird. It's cyclical. You're strong, and then so it's kind of cyclical. It's Skype, and we'll see if it resolves itself. If not, we'll reset the connection. Now, I got an email earlier today which said you've got to ask Peter about the connection with L. Ron Hubbard to Jack Parsons. And I read that and I just laughed because it's exactly what you and I were talking about today. And I get this email and I read that and I knew that we were going to cover it. But before we get to that, it's that type of research when you start to look at not only with different assassinations or different seminal events throughout history, is it easy to, when you find an individual, like let's, for instance, L. Ron Hubbard, how is it easy to just chase down and connect the dots? Because it just seems like it's right there in front of us, but we don't know it.
Well, that's the thing. It is right there in front of us. I began these investigations long before there was internet access and Google, so you had to do it in a very painstaking way. You had to go and find the documents yourself. You had to interview people yourself. This stuff is not readily available. So Sinister Forces really was a labor of love that began around the time of Watergate. So that's how long ago I began this. So it was one of these things where you're going along, you're plodding along, and then suddenly another piece of information falls into your lap, and your hair goes gray overnight when you realize the implications, and that happens a lot.
Peter, we have completely
in front of us.
We've completely lost you. You faded away. Let's take a break. I'm going to reset the connection back to you.
Fair enough.
Okay, I'll be right back at you. All right, everybody. Yeah, it's. I'm just going to reset it right away, and it's kind of weird. It's kind of fading, but we can switch to a landline if we need to. Peter, are you back with us?
I sure am.
Now you're crystal clear.
Well, you're coming in 5 by 5, and you're coming in very clear. So
okay. Now I feel good. Okay. Let's start where it's easy. Let's start with Maury Island. And let's just, because that seems to be in history for all of us on so many different fronts. 1947 was a key year, and what always comes to mind first is Roswell, but it didn't really start there, did it? It started at Maury Island.
Oh, it sure did, and Maury Island usually gets eclipsed by the writers who are talking about the UFO phenomenon because it was this weird little incident that was overshadowed by Kenneth Arnold and then overshadowed by Roswell. But Maury Island is a key event. I think it's the seminal event. It led to everything, and we just didn't put the pieces together until relatively recently. Maury Island in Puget Sound in the state of Washington. What happened was there was a fisherman, basically, called Harold, and he was on his boat. And he's hanging out in his boat, and it's bad weather. It's sort of raining, and he's there with his dog and a co-worker of his, and I think his teenage son. And they're all sitting on the boat, and suddenly they see basically a squadron of 6 strange flying objects over them. They don't know what that's all about. They're taking photographs, actually. It's really important to realize that the very first UFO phenomenon of the 20th century, the seminal event in 1947, there were photographs taken. Harold Dahl was there with his camera. He took pictures. But one of the 6 saucers, let's say, or the objects, the flying objects, developed some kind of mechanical problem. And the other craft were flying around it, circling it, but this craft was really having some serious problems, and it started to disintegrate. And parts of the craft rained down on Harold Dahl in his boat and killed his dog. So his dog is dead, his boat is damaged, his teenage son is wounded. Harold Dahl, gets back on land and reports all of this to his boss. And his boss is Fred Lee Crisman. Now, Fred Lee Crisman, to the JFK assassination aficionados, know that Crisman was one of the people interrogated by District Attorney Jim Garrison in New Orleans regarding a putative connection to the assassination. But long before the assassination, we're talking 1947, so this is 20 years before Jim Garrison even hears the name for.
Yeah, Peter, we're breaking up. I don't know what's up with Skype. I'm going to call you back on your landline and let's reset. I'm going to throw into commercial and we'll be right back after this.
Okay.
All right, everybody, stay with us. I'm resetting.
Hi everybody, this is Rob Halford, the Metal Guard on JimmyChurchRadio.com.
What's up? My name's Brian Taylor, Ninja Badass Extraordinaire, and this is JimmyChurchRadio.com.
JJCR in your face.
JimmyChurchRadio.com on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
All right, everybody, we're back. This is Fade to Black. Bespoke radio for the masses. Yeah, Skype sometimes just does what it does. So let's just jump right back in with Peter. Peter, are you with us, sir?
I sure am.
Okay, now you're live. You're good. Okay, let's go back to Fred Crisman and let's just pick up with Maury Island.
Well, Fred Crisman was the boss of Harold Dahl, the guy whose dog died. Crisman was some sort of harbor master at Puget Sound. Dahl went back to him, told him what happened, showed him some of the rocks that had fallen onto the boat, some of the debris, took that to Crisman. Crisman, for some reason, then decides to notify Raymond Palmer, who's a publisher of one of these strange, amazing stories magazines that were very popular at the time, all sorts of strange science fiction tales and fantasy stuff. And he's trying to arrange some kind of deal with Raymond Palmer. And as he's doing this, about 2 days after the famous Harold Dahl saucer incident, Kenneth Arnold is flying over the same part of the world in the Pacific Northwest, and he's the one who actually coins the phrase flying saucer. He sees another squadron of flying objects. They're going at tremendous speed. He's trying to clock them. They're going faster than any aircraft that he's aware of. He's an accomplished pilot. He has a lot of credentials to his name. He's a search and rescue guy as well. So he knows the terrain. He knows aircraft. He knows his business. He sees these things, and he can't figure out what they are because the way they're flying is so unusual. He considers it's like saucers skipping over a body of water, and that's where the flying saucer notion came from. So Arnold then reports this, and he becomes a kind of minor celebrity. Crisman tries to get him together with this strange publisher to write a story about his encounter with these flying objects. So now all of this is taking place in the same town near Maury Island. We've got Kenneth Arnold coming down for an interview. We've got Fred Lee Crisman there. We've got Harold Dahl with his dead dog and his wounded son. They're all in this little thing together. Raymond Palmer is getting involved. He's the publisher of the magazine. But something fishy is happening. Kenneth Arnold shows up in town. Every single hotel is booked, fully booked. He can't get a room. He goes to the most expensive hotel in town, and he finds there is a room there. It has already been reserved in his name, and yet nobody knew that he was coming. So he's there. He's in his room. He meets Fred Crisman. Crisman then interviews him.
about the whole UFO incident. A transcript of this interview later appears the following day in the local newspaper. So obviously the room was bugged. Now Kenneth Arnold's getting, angry about all this. He thinks there's a hoax involved. He thinks Crisman is some kind of spy. Kenneth Arnold departs. He gets away from all this. Doesn't want to have anything more to do with Crisman or any of this. But at the same time, the Air Force, the Army Air Force at the time, sends a couple of officers over to check out the UFO story. They talk to Crisman. Crisman brings them a box full of rocks that evidently is supposed to be the debris from the fallen UFO. The two officers take this box of rocks with them onto a military transport. They're going to fly back to their base, and they never make it. Their plane blows up in midair. They die on board the plane. The two Army Air Force officers.
And they become the first two UFO casualties in the modern era.
If you don't count the dog.
If you don't count the dog, right? And I wanted to. Did Kenneth Arnold ever refer back to this event in future interviews?
He did refer to the whole Crisman thing, but he referred to it very obliquely and claimed that either the guy who had brought him out there was a hoaxer or a spy. That's exactly what he said. He thought there was something very fishy about Crisman. He didn't know how fishy. So Arnold goes back home. Raymond Palmer writes some stories. He publishes some fantastic accounts of the UFO experience. But the most important part is Crisman and Harold Dahl and this box of rocks and the exploding Army aircraft. By the way, the crewmen of the aircraft parachuted to safety. When they investigated the crashed aircraft, they found that the fire extinguisher equipment on board the plane was all malfunctioning. Everything was malfunctioning on that plane for some reason, and the two Army officers could not get off the plane. They died in the crash. So there was something very, very sinister about this whole thing. Well, now you have to fast forward to 1968, roughly 67, 68. You have Jim Garrison in New Orleans, and he makes a connection to Fred Crisman. He thinks he has no knowledge of Fred Crisman's UFO thing at all. All he's concerned about Crisman is his connection with some strange churches and his connection with maybe the Minutemen or some very right-wing organizations.
Right.
He finds out that Crisman had been an OSS agent during the war, the forerunner of the CIA. He had some very strange occupational things going on in the state of Washington. He was investigating the gypsies. He was doing all sorts of weird stuff, for which evidently he was paid money. So as he's investigating Crisman, of course, one of the main focuses of his investigation was a guy called Guy Bannister. Now, the people who've seen the JFK movie know Guy Bannister. Ed Asner played Bannister in the film, in the movie JFK.
And who played Garrison?
Garrison was played by Kevin Costner.
Exactly. And that's a good reference for everybody, our audience out there listening. When you think of JFK, think about Guy Bannister and Garrison's roles in the movie. And you know exactly who we're talking about. And how this all connects is just absolutely, I mean, it's just...
Well, how it connects is mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling.
They declassified eventually a lot of FBI files just relatively recently, in the last 10, 15 years or so, I guess. Files dating back to the 1940s, files dating back to the whole UFO investigations that the FBI was actually very interested in for reasons of national security. They didn't know what was going on. And they created something called, wait for it, the X-Files. Now, the X-Files did really, literally exist. That's what they were called. The airtels, the air telegrams, the memos that you see concerning the UFOs are all marked Subject X, every single one. And one of the major contributors to this wealth of data on UFO observations, on interviewing witnesses, on doing the whole Men in Black thing, was none other than Guy Bannister. Guy Bannister, Fred Crisman, they were all in it together in the Pacific Northwest. Guy Bannister at the time was stationed someplace out in North Dakota or something, and he was with the FBI, and he was filing regular reports directly to the attention of J. Edgar Hoover on the UFO sightings that were taking place in the Pacific Northwest. And these went right to the director. The director was obsessed with this story because he didn't know what this aircraft represented. Was it some weird Russian and Soviet aircraft that had been developed?
Right.
Was it something not of this world? What the hell was it? So Hoover was interested, and Bannister's researching it, and Krisman is there, and Bannister, of course, Guy Bannister, the Ed Asner guy in the movie, is running the office, the detective agency, out of which we have people like David Ferry, Jack Martin, and of course Lee Harvey Oswald. So we have Krisman, who's the suspect as a conspirator in the assassination. We have Guy Bannister, who's a suspect in the Kennedy assassination, and they both cut their eye teeth on researching the UFO phenomenon, or actually being involved in some way with the UFO phenomenon in 1947.
At this point, when you're researching this, this is the question that it begs to answer. I'm watching Twitter right now with tweets that are saying things like "Holy crap, my head just exploded," right? And it had to have been the same for you. I mean, at what point did you just think that this is totally volatile and you are really going into a zone that you don't need to go into?
Well, I mean, this kind of thing is what I live for. So, I mean, if I'm coming up with information like this and I'm seeing the documents and I'm reading them, it's a very painstaking process that no one's giving you a guide to this stuff, right?
Right.
So you get a bunch of FBI files, digitized copies maybe on CDs or downloading them from the internet or something from the FBI's own website. You've got to go painstakingly through this. The FBI doesn't say, hey, look, we have Guy Bannister's UFO files, So you're just going through and you're seeing, W.G. Bannister at the end of these things, and you're backtracking. You find out, yes, that was where he was stationed. Yes, this is Bannister. This is really Guy Bannister. On some of the memos, you see he's written out his name, Guy Bannister, and we know he was with the FBI. We know he was at SAC. He was a special agent in charge in Chicago, before he went down to New Orleans. I mean, so this guy had all of this under his belt. When I started to see this, it was mind-boggling. Holy crap is the right way to characterize it. It was amazing stuff, and at the same time bewildering. What does all of this mean? What is? I mean, how does this happen? How does it happen that only a handful of people are involved in all the seminal events of the 20th century?
Right, and also, and I don't want to give away one of the most interesting things of all of this is. You even had an indirect or direct involvement too, as well, when we get to the Brooklyn part of it. And when we get to that is when your head really must have started swimming. I can only imagine.
Oh, it's still swimming on that one because more information has come to light since Sinister Forces was published. I mean, just in the last month or so, I've come across more documentation. So my head is still swimming, I can tell you that.
Are you going to share that with us?
I sure will.
All right. Okay, let's get back to the timeline. So 1968 and 1947, Bannister, and so let's get back to where we were.
Well, you have Guy Bannister. For those of you familiar with the film or with the assassination in general, you know that Guy Bannister had an office, a detective agency, within walking distance of all the major intelligence agency headquarters in New Orleans, as was pointed out by Kevin Costner in the film. So there's Guy Bannister, who's running, an anti-communist deal. He's running guns, to anti-Castro Cubans. He's got anti-Castro Cubans falling out of his office constantly. He's got neo-Nazi literature. He's got, very racist right-wing stuff. His secretary was a famous racist, as we found out later. She was running all sorts of campaigns against black people and, making signs, just horrible stuff. And so it was a real right-wing cabal that was taking place at that at Camp Street in New Orleans. And somehow Lee Harvey Oswald's involved with all of this, right? He's stamping the address of this office on his Fair Play for Cuba leaflets. I mean, he's part of the scene. He knows David Ferry. David Ferry and he were in the same Civil Air Patrol unit down in New Orleans at the time. I mean, previous to this. So you have all of these weird little connections swirling around Guy Bannister, former FBI, former UFO investigator for the FBI. You've got Fred Prisman, and now you have David Ferry and Jack Martin. What a couple of real psychos, right? I mean, real characters. If you saw the film, you know that Joe Pesci played the role of David Ferry, the guy with the fake orange wig and who's freaking out, drinking all the coffee, smoking all the cigarettes, and he's terrified that he knows too much about the assassination. And then you have Jack Lemmon playing Jack Martin. Jack Martin was an investigator for Guy Bannister. As it turns out, I had, very close connections. I was a handshake away from Jack Martin when I was a teenager, didn't realize it. As I realized later on, and as I just uncovered proof of about a month ago. So this was some fascinating stuff. What does all this mean? And then in the back of all of this, there's one other event that we haven't discussed yet. It took place in the 1950s, and that took place in a little farmhouse in Maine. And that is what brought all of these disparate threads of conspiracy, of space aliens, UFOs, religious groups, and everything else all together in one neat little bundle. And that was the affair of the Nine. And that's the situation that, to this day, when I came across the names in the Warren report, I couldn't believe it. I had to go back through the Warren Commission report documents again and again. I had to go through the Mary Farrell, website to make sure I wasn't imagining things. I had to look through a lot of databases, and in the end, it was inescapable. There was a direct connection between a bunch of psychics and mediums and a seance that took place in Maine in 1952 and 53, and the assassination, direct connection to the Kennedy assassination. And that is what no one else had talked about it. No one else had uncovered it. No one else made the connections. But when I saw the names dropping left and right to the Warren transcripts, I just didn't believe it. And when I saw what Alan Dulles tried to do to cover it up, I couldn't believe that either. So if we have time, I'll go into that.
Yeah, Dulles seemed to have his finger in just about every pie, too, as well. Well, all of these guys. But
Dulles, he was a piece of work.
He was. Really quick, this is Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your humble host, Jimmy Church. We are talking with Peter Levenda. We're discussing the secret space program, and we do have a gallery up at jimmychurchradio.com if you would like to go over and follow the usual suspects in this tale. We've got them up in a basic chronological order, but at least all of their names are on each picture. So you will be able to, as this tale goes back and forth in the timeline, but you can tie in the faces with everybody that Peter is referring to. Okay, now moving on. Yeah, John Dulles. Well, okay, I'm going to stop. Let's touch on that a little bit. I don't want to segue too far out of the timeline here, but he is also a major player, not only in 63 with Kennedy and 68 or whenever the Warren Commission went down, but he goes back in time too as well. So maybe we should spend a few minutes on Dulles.
Well, the Dulles brothers, they go back to World War I. I mean, their involvement in American politics and geopolitical affairs, let's say, goes back to the First World War. Dulles and his law firm was heavily involved in assisting the Nazi Party to rise to power. There's no escaping this fact. I mean, his law firm, Sullivan and Cromwell, was very much involved in the events of the Versailles Treaty. Dulles and his brother John Foster Dulles were thinking that we were being too harsh on Germany after World War I and all the punitive reparations we were forcing Germany to make. They were involved in that. They were involved in the 1930s and the early 1940s in various nefarious things, trying to protect German assets abroad, trying to protect German assets in the United States and in countries around the world. They were doing what they could to make sure that the Nazis were, being funded and were being supplied with the materials they need. The Dulles brothers saw communism as the ultimate evil. For them, communism was the presence of Satan in the world. And so whoever was going to fight communism was a good guy, as far as they were concerned. And the only people who had the courage to go up against the Soviets, in the eyes of the Dulles brothers, was Nazi Germany. They felt that Germany, yes, posed a threat to the world eventually, and Dulles, of course, was running an OSS office out of Switzerland during the war. But what he was really doing there is something of a mystery. He didn't seem to be all that disposed against the Nazis. He helped a lot of them to survive, to escape. He feathered their nests, really. He was a guy who had sympathies for the Nazis. You know, some of his recorded transcripts and some of the other memos written by other people who were present when Dulles was talking to Nazi leaders before they surrendered, trying to arrange the surrender of the German forces, reveal that he didn't really much care what was happening during the Holocaust. He didn't much care what the Germans did to the Jews. That was not his concern. His only concern was how do we stop the spread of the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe and to the rest of Europe. His concern was a geopolitical one. It was not a moral issue with Dulles. It was not an ethical issue with Dulles. Dulles was concerned only about the Soviet Union and really basically nothing else. So his all of his actions, you know, stem from that position of being an anti-communist. And his position was so radical that it involved, of course, the Bay of Pigs invasion. It involved disobeying some of Kennedy's direct orders. We know now much more than we did before about what went on with Bay of Pigs. We've had people come out finally from CIA and from other places talking about, you know, what really went down. And the whole idea that Kennedy, you know, willfully withheld air support from the invasion is wrong. It's wrong in the face of it. The documents do not support this famous contention that Kennedy callously allowed the people to die on the beaches of the Bay of Pigs.
Right.
So that's not really what happened. He was lied to. He was disobeyed. People went behind his back. They said, we're not going to listen to Kennedy. We're going to do what we think is right. And, of course, a disaster ensued. But this is nothing new. People have to really realize that the president may be the commander-in-chief. The president may be the elected leader of the free world and all the rest of it. But quite often, no one listens to him, no matter what president it happens to be. The same was true with, for instance, with Truman. President Truman, right after World War II was over, forbade the Army and the defense people in general to bring committed Nazis into the United States to work for us. He expressly said, he will not do this, and they ignored him. They brought over hundreds, if not thousands, people who were war criminals, people who had terrible records, like Werner von Braun, like Walter Dornberg, who started our space program, were members of the SS responsible for murder.
Peter, you dropped out there. Are you on a cordless phone? There
yes,
you are.
I am right now.
Okay. You're back.
Okay.
Let's get back to the timeline. So back to 1947 with, I don't want to change your presentation, but Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard,
Sure.
and then we'll start to move back forward again. I mean, I'm trying to with the audience. This story goes back and forth in the timeline. So many times it's you present it in such a way that it's easy to follow. So I should shut up now is what I should do. And,
no, not at all.
Okay.
No, I'll go back. Parsons, the story of Parsons and the beginning of the American space program is bizarre also. It's surreal. It's unbelievable. It really begins on Halloween in 1936. And there's a famous photograph. There's the first rocket scientist that America had was a guy called Jack Parsons and an associate of Theodore von Karman. And they were out there launching the first, looks like a little bottle rocket, basically, but they were investigating rocket fuel. They were trying to find out how to escape gravity. And our space program begins there in 1936. Jack Parsons, as far as I know, did not have a university degree, but he was a brilliant engineer. He experimented with fireworks and with rockets since he was a kid. He got involved in the fledgling space program at around this time. The U.S. Navy was looking for ways to store fuel on board ship to be used to launch rockets from on board ship, and the fuel that they would store would either degrade or would explode. And it was Jack Parsons who came up with the formula that would help America win the war, basically. He made a very big contribution with the creation of special rocket fuel. The guy was a brilliant scientist and engineer. There's a crater on the moon named after him. He was one of the founders of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. But at the same time, he was a follower of Aleister Crowley. He was involved in magic, in ceremonial magic, in esoteric things, in ritual magic out in the desert in California, the Mojave. This was a guy who was a dedicated occultist at the same time as he was an actual rocket scientist. And it was because of this interest in the occult and his deep involvement with occult societies, secret societies, and magical orders that he came into contact with L. Ron Hubbard. Now, L. Ron Hubbard at this point was a naval officer. He had been seen some kind of action someplace in the rear, I think, in Australia, in the Pacific. He had been involved in some minor things. He developed ulcers. He was in the hospital for something. I think they were going to demobilize him. He was an aspiring science fiction author, and he came across Jack Parsons and Jack Parsons' group of fellow occultists and writers, science fiction authors, and hung out with them for a while and became fascinated with Parsons, became fascinated with ritual magic, and together they began working rituals in the desert, summoning all sorts of spirits, trying to summon a goddess. Parsons wanted to summon, to bring down onto the earth in physical form a magical partner that he could work with. All of this stuff is going on with L. Ron Hubbard. This is long before Hubbard, of course, started Scientology. And Hubbard, at one point, absconded with Jack Parsons' money and Jack Parsons' girlfriend. Hubbard at this time was already married to someone else. Hubbard took the money and the girl to Miami, to Florida, and bought a yacht and was attempting to flee when Parsons ran over to Miami from California, flew out there just in the nick of time. And according to Parsons, he summoned a storm using occult means. The storm forced the ship back to port where Hubbard was arrested for bigamy because he married Hubbard's girlfriend while he was already married to someone else. And so there he was a bigamist, and he absconded with money. He absconded with, at that time, a princely sum, which I guess was around $10,000, a lot of money in 1947. This is a little bit later than 47. And this is what's going on. You know, L. Ron Hubbard took what he learned from Parsons to help start Scientology. And in his early speeches, if you find copies of what Hubbard was writing about and talking about in the late 40s, he's talking about Crowley constantly. He's talking about Aleister Crowley, this famous magician who started an entire generation of magic. He appears on the cover of Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album as one of the people they like. Crowley's a very famous name, and Hubbard claimed that he knew him, which of course he did not. Aleister Crowley died in 1947, long before Hubbard ever heard of him. But Hubbard would claim to have known him, to have gotten all of his magical knowledge from Aleister Crowley, praised him, and then suddenly at some point someone told him, ixnay on the Oli cray, and so he pretty much stopped talking about Crowley, and then all of that went away, and then Scientology happened, and the rest is history. But all of this began with Hubbard and Jack Parsons, the famous rocket scientist in the deserts outside of Pasadena. And this is how it all began. This is how the Jet Propulsion Laboratory began. This is how rocket science began. It was with a rocket scientist, a brilliant engineer, who was also an occultist, and then who died mysteriously in an explosion in his home. No one really quite is sure what happened. The official story is he dropped a chemical which blew up, fulminate of mercury. We don't know if that's really true or not. There's a lot of evidence to show that maybe he was murdered. He was in contact with Israel. He was trying to help Israel jumpstart their space program, or at least their rocket program. At the time, he lost his own security clearance. And the people that he worked with to found the Jet Propulsion Laboratory were also came under suspicion during the McCarthy era of having been communists or having been working with other countries. So the beginning of our space program is very, very bizarre. We have Parsons and Hubbard on the West Coast. And then we have the Nazi scientists on the East Coast and the Midwest, all developing, rockets for us and supposedly for us. It's the whole story it's unbelievable. It doesn't make sense. If you try to write the history of it, you have to include all of this information, and then the narrative falls apart. You've got occultists, you've got rituals in the desert, you've got Scientology, you've got Nazis, you've got all of this, and that is how our space program began.
And we haven't even got to the crazy part, the hats.
No.
we haven't gotten to the absolute bizarrest part of this story and how all of this weaves back into itself. And we'll do that right now. This is Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network. We're talking with Peter Levenda. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. And that's a good segue. Let's take a trip to Brooklyn, shall we?
Actually, the Bronx.
Or the Bronx.
Well, it's the Bronx. I'm a Bronx boy. You know, Brooklyn is nice. I lived in Brooklyn. But the story really begins in the Bronx. And, this is still not even the most bizarre part, but it's pretty strange.
Oh, it's strange. It's when you unraveled this one and tied all of this together, which it's right there in plain sight. But it was one of those things. I'm serious. I wrapped my head around that about 5 times and was just bewildered. I mean, how could this possibly be? You could take the best screenwriter in Hollywood, Peter, and he could not come up with this. Could not. Impossible.
Yeah, and in fact, it's so impossible that even serious investigators bang their heads against this one because they couldn't get past it. Jim Garrison himself, the DA, the Kevin Costner guy, wrote letters to the House Subcommittee on Assassinations when this started again in the 70s, saying, you got to look into this, man, because I can't figure it out. It's got something to do with all this, but I don't know what it is. Even Garrison couldn't get any traction on the story. And he had, all kinds of people at his disposal to do the research, and they couldn't figure it out. And the only reason I'm able to figure it out, and really the only reason, is because I was there. I was in the middle of it, and as a teenager, and didn't quite know it, but I knew the players. I knew what was going on around me in general, but I couldn't tie it all together until decades after the assassination, when everything started to fall into place, and I couldn't believe what I was looking at the FBI files. This involves a church. This was 1968 for me. I graduated high school in 1968 from the same high school that David Berkowitz graduated from. If you remember, that's the Son of Sam killer, the alleged Son of Sam killer. A strange time, a strange place. The Tet Offensive had taken place in January of 68. The Vietnam War was at full swing. We had 2 assassinations. We had Bobby Kennedy down. We had Martin Luther King down. And then we had the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, which was another tragedy. So we had all of this was going on in 1968, and I'm a teenager. And I'm involved with some weird churches. The story behind that's probably too long to tell in the time we have left, so I'm going to cut to the chase on it and simply say that I wound up joining a group called the American Orthodox Catholic Church, AOCC for short. And the AOCC was located in a church building in the Bronx, near the Bronx Zoo, appropriately enough. And in the church, we had a number of bishops and no congregants, no people, no one in the pews. There was only bishops, only priests, and that was it. Nobody actually went to the church, for the normal church things. This was strictly a front operation. And at 18 years old, I didn't really know much better than that, but I got involved with the church. I knew everybody, all the players quite personally. I knew the archbishop who created the church, a guy called Profeta. I knew his assistants. I knew the people who came in and out. For about a year or so, I saw a lot of strange stuff. But it was 1968 after all. People were doing drugs. They were doing all sorts of things. So strange stuff was par for the course. The leader and the creator of this church was a former Ukrainian Orthodox priest who had become the archbishop of his own church. He broke away from the standard Ukrainian church, formed his own church. His name was Profeta, Walter Profeta. He started this church. He was a dedicated anti-communist. He showed me letters from the White House, not the White House, from Thomas Dewey, that would have appointed him White House chaplain had Dewey won the election against Truman back at the time, back in 48. So he was that dedicated, a communist, a dedicated Republican, dedicated anti-communist rather, what was on television promoting an anti-communist line all the time. And it was rather famous in his own right. But there was something fishy about his entire operation. As I say, there were no people attending the church. There were only bishops and priests. Okay, I was with that church. I was ordained in that church. I was elevated to the rank of abbot by this guy in 1969 in March. And then my relationship with the church fell apart for a number of reasons. And it was only with the passage of decades that I came across the name of the church again in the FBI files that were attached to the Warren Report and to later on to Garrison's own investigation of the churches because of David Ferry. David Ferry, played by Joe Pesci in the film, in the JFK film, was a bishop in this same church. Jack Martin, the guy played by Jack Lemmon in the film, the investigator for Guy Bannister, was a bishop in this church. The photographs your people will see on the website are the only photographs in existence of Jack Martin dressed as a priest. These are photographs that were taken, about 10 years, I guess, before his death. They show him dressed as a priest. These are the only photographs in existence in captivity that I know of that show this. And they were given to me by one of the other bishops a couple of years ago. I started to look at this all together. I saw names like Carl Stanley, some strange priest up in Kentucky who was ordaining and consecrating all these so-called priests. And eventually it dawns on you that these are not priests, these are not bishops. This whole thing is a front. It's an intelligence operation. What was going on was a bona fide intelligence operation. Profeta used to brag that he had FBI and CIA on the board of directors of his church, and I thought he was exaggerating until I started to see the documentation, until I started to see the interviews, the interrogations by the FBI of some of the other priests, some of the other bishops. And then I started my own investigation. As I was much older by this time, I started calling up whoever was still alive, whoever could still remember what was going on, and they were more than happy to share documents with me, to discuss the background with me, to talk about their own personal encounters with all of these people. And there is absolutely no other conclusion to come to, but that the churches that Garrison was so bewildered by formed part of an intelligence operation in the United States to give cover to agents and to operations that were operating both domestically and abroad.
Looking back, when there were no congregations for you to see at the church as a kid, 18 years old, looking back, now do you realize how strange it was?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I thought it was rather strange then, but I gave them the benefit of a doubt because, this was an Orthodox church. This was a bizarre, sort of church, on the fringes of mainstream religion. The Orthodox churches in the United States anyway are kind of, they're kind of bizarre to most people. The Greek Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, Serbians, Bulgarians, everything else. So people think of them as, little ethnic enclaves. But the Russian Orthodox Church, as an example, is a central player in the Kennedy assassination. George de Mohrenschildt, who introduced Lee Oswald to the pains to get him his job at the Texas School Book Depository, George de Mohrenschildt was very thick with the Russian Orthodox Church in Texas. He introduced Lee Harvey Oswald around to these people. The Russian Orthodox Church was very involved. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church was very involved. During World War II, they were pro-Nazi because they were anti-Soviet Union.
Right.
So they formed entire, divisions fighting on the side of the Nazis to try to take back the Ukraine from Russia. We gave them all a blank check, and we brought them back to the United States.
Michael Anderson just tweeted a great question. He just tweeted, did the Vatican know about this?
Well, yeah, and that takes us to another area, and I'm going to be very fast about it because I know there's a lot we want to cover.
Right.
To the Vatican, though, I would say I personally, I was a kind of a secretary to the American Orthodox Catholic Church when I was there.
Right.
I handled a lot of correspondence. I did translations into French and from French into English. That was one of my special languages. So I was, kind of involved with that. And a lot of the people that I was in correspondence with were people who were connected to the Vatican. One of them was a man, I'll talk about him openly now, it's been a long time, a guy called Prince Policastro of Sicily, of Catania, I think. He was a papal prince. He was a nobleman who had been created by the Pope. The Pope has the ability to create, houses of nobility. So there are papal princes, there are papal dukes, et cetera, et cetera. This was a prince, Prince Policastro, and I was in communication with him. The people that I dealt with, the American bishops, they all lusted after having knighthoods. They wanted to be Sir this or Sir that, or they wanted even better to be a Baron or a Duke or something like that. And these guys could do that. These were papal nobilities, papal dignities, and they were worth a lot more than some guy just creating it out of whole cloth, because this was kind of legitimate. So I was involved with the American Orthodox Catholic Church in constant correspondence back and forth with these papal noblemen who belonged to the Catholic Church. I mean, they were part of the Vatican operation. This is a side of the church that nobody ever really sees. You hear of the Knights of Malta. You hear of all of this going on. You know this exists also. There's a kind of secret society, a kind of international network. It's an espionage network, among other things, the Knights of Malta. But then you'd never hear about the papal princes, and their nobilities and how they give out knighthoods and how they form their own networks as well to support the church. So to answer the question, as quickly as I can, yes, the Vatican was aware of a lot of this. They had no problem with it. During the Biafran Civil War, however, I was at the church at the time. There was a civil war in Biafra in Nigeria, and there was the Catholic groups were fighting the non-Catholic groups. The Biafrans were the Catholics. They were being besieged by the Nigerians. And our church, the American Orthodox Catholic Church, came down on the side of the anti-Catholics at the time. And we had to receive famous individuals from Nigeria. I met them at the airport, took them into the Bronx, took them into the church, where they stayed for a couple of days before they went back. They became consecrated bishops. These were pagans. Okay, these are people who were not even Christian. They came to the Bronx. The Holy Prophet Eluya was one of them. I'll never forget this guy. A little rotund guy who carried one of these fly whisks with him and everything else. The guy was a shaman, basically. But he was sent by his government, by Nigeria, because he was accompanied by Nigerian officials, to go to the Bronx, to this nondescript church next to the zoo, where he was consecrated a bishop in the church and sent back on the plane to Nigeria.
Insane.
This was part of some deal that was being worked, I mean, this stuff was going on all the time. And it was obvious the church was formed as a front for some kind of intelligence operation, and Profeta was deeply involved with that. He was deeply involved with J. Edgar Hoover. Carl Stanley, who appears in the FBI records, who ordained David Ferry, who ordained Jack Martin, Carl Stanley is summoned to Profeta during the time of the Garrison investigations. He's summoned over to see Profeta in the Bronx. He's being told, you have to succumb to a background check. The FBI is going to check you and clear you. You need a security clearance at this point to remain a bishop in our church, a security clearance. Stanley either didn't want to or couldn't afford to withstand because he had a criminal record. Stanley goes back to Kentucky. He dies 2 weeks later, mysteriously dies on the same day that David Ferry dies in New Orleans.
It's one of the twists. Okay, now this is a good point to reset all of our characters in this drama.
Yeah.
A reset, because we still have to go back. We got to get back to Jack Parsons, JPL, Ken Su-Sen. We've got to get him into play, Warner Von Braun, and then move forward into the 9 and reset that with Lee Harvey Oswald, and how all of this is one big drama. So I hand it back to you to get the timeline reset here. This is a good spot to do that.
Okay. Well, as I said, we're losing bishops left and right. We lost Carl Stanley. We lost David Ferry. Jack Martin stayed as a bishop. He continued consecrating other people's bishops right to the end of his life. It's something people don't know about Jack Martin. David Ferry is another story. So I found out recently, just to end this end of it on the American Orthodox Catholic Church, I promised I would reveal to you what I just learned about a month ago. Jim Garrison's files were finally released so that the people could look at them. I was desperate to look at them for a long time because I suspected what might be in there. And lo and behold, I found it. I found on the letterhead of the church that I used to type on, around the time that I was at the church, a letter from Profeta, the head of the American Orthodox Catholic Church, to Jim Garrison directly, asking him to please release Jack Martin back into his care and to send Jack Martin back to the Bronx. So that tied the whole thing together for me. There was the proof, the actual evidence that Profeta, Jack Martin, David Ferry, all in this together, all suspects in the assassination. And there I was sitting there like an idiot in the middle of all of it as a teenager, an 18-year-old, dutifully typing correspondence for all of this. And just it was only within the last few weeks that I actually came across the document itself. And I looked at it, and basically a shiver ran down my spine at looking at that, because it brought back a lot of memories. It brought back the memories of me typing on that very stationery, working for that very guy who wrote that letter, not knowing in '68 that, Profeta was actually deeply involved with this conspiracy. So,
real quick, Peter, I think you're wandering away from the handset a little bit.
I've got it right up against my.
There you are. You're all good. You're all good. You're all good.
Okay.
This is Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your humble host, Jimmy Church. We're talking to Peter Levenda, the Secret Space Program. This is a crazy, crazy tale. We started with Maury Island and a cast of undercover agents, con men, over to the Bronx with a church that was staffed by bishops, basically, that were all undercover agents for the FBI. Ties that into J. Edgar Hoover, back to the White House, and we didn't even talk about the Dewey election, but back to a couple of deaths of the bishops, and it's such a and we haven't even gotten to the 9 yet. So
so let's segue into the 9 then this way. We'll start with Jack Parsons. Parsons worked for a while for the Howard Hughes organization. That takes us into another area we don't have time to get into, but that's another bizarre element of American history and Parsons and all the rest of it. But he lost his security clearance at Hughes Aircraft. And he tried to reinstate it. He tried to get himself reinstated. Then he just gave up, decided he would go to Mexico, where he'd live out the rest of his life. And it was while packing for that trip that he died mysteriously. That was on June 17th, 1952. That same year is when we have a seance in Maine of a man run by a guy called Andrija Puharich. Andrija Puharich from the former Yugoslavia was a well-known scientist. He was a medical doctor. He was an inventor. He was a lot of things, but he's probably most famous to us in the United States for having introduced us to Uri Geller. Uri Geller is the guy who could bend forks and spoons with his mind. This was the paranormal expert that Puharich had discovered. But long before this, in 1952 and in 1953, Andrija Puharich is working. It's during the Cold War. It's during the Korean War. Puharich is now working for the Army. He has a commission in the Army. He's, I believe, a captain in the U.S. Army. He's giving lectures at Edgewood Arsenal down in Maryland, which is where they do all this, the chemical and biological warfare stuff. He's giving lectures down there on how to weaponize the paranormal, how to weaponize ESP, how to weaponize telekinesis, psychokinesis, all this stuff. He's very involved in that. He really truly believes that you can do this, that you could create, psychic warriors, basically. While he's, involved in doing this, while he has a commission, he has an institute in Maine, which is being funded by all sorts of different people. A lot of money is pouring into him to develop equipment for weaponizing psychic powers, for curing blindness using different types of equipment. He has all kinds of stuff on the drawing board. But he conducts a seance. He pulls together a lot of his friends in order to have this bizarre seance in the woods at night. And the attendees are 9 people. And the 9 people who attend include a DuPont, an Astor, a Forbes, and Arthur Young. This is the famous name that we have to drop into this almost reluctantly. Arthur Young was the inventor or the co-inventor or the inventor of the Bell helicopter. Arthur Young was a famous inventor. He made a lot of money on that, but after the war was over, after World War II was over, he decided to leave the military-industrial complex and devote all of his life to the study of the paranormal, Eastern religions, and that sort of thing. He wrote a number of very influential books. very dense for some people on mathematical analysis of the processes behind creativity, behind reality. He was very involved in all of this. And his wife was Ruth Forbes Payne Young. She was a Forbes, basically. She had married someone else called Payne, divorced him, and then married Arthur Young and stayed married to him for the rest of their life. They lived in the main line within Philadelphia. They were very wealthy. They had their own estate outside of Philadelphia where they conducted their experiments on and on. Well, here's the connection. They have a seance. And as I said, there's a DuPont in residence, Astor. All the blue blood American moneyed families are there for a seance conducted by this weird Yugoslavian guy who has a commission in the army. And what happens is the seance ends with a contact with an alien intelligence. Now, Puharich has actually written about this. I'm not making this up. Puharich wrote about this. He even wrote about who attended it, just so nobody paid attention. So there's this alien spacecraft hovering over the Earth. And there's a medium, a man from India, a very famous guy, as it turned out, because I managed to contact the family eventually. He was acting as a medium, and through him was speaking these alien intelligences. At first, to prove that they were really what they said they were, they solved a few mathematical equations that Puharich had put to them. So they proved that they were intelligent beings from outer space or whatever. And then they said something very startling. They said, you are 9 individuals. You are 9 people. We are also 9. You are 9 and we are 9. We're here to help you, control, direct the future of the planet. They gave this commission, essentially, to these 9 predominantly wealthy individuals, including Arthur Young and his wife, Ruth. Okay, maybe that would have been the end of it. A weird seance, a bunch of rich people, who knows what they get up to, fine, end of story. That was in 1952. By 1963, Arthur Young has a son-in-law, basically. His wife, Ruth Forbes Payne, was married to a guy called George Lyman Payne. They had a son called Michael Payne. Michael Payne is now working for Bell Aerospace. Well, he got the job for him. Arthur Young got him the job at Bell Aerospace in Dallas. Michael Payne's wife is Ruth Payne. Ruth Payne, nice lady, still alive. I actually ran into her a couple of years ago. Ruth Payne is the woman who befriended Lee and Marina Oswald. Lee and Marina Oswald lived in her house. Marina Oswald especially, and their children lived with Ruth Payne. Ruth Payne's ostensible reason was she wanted to learn Russian. This is after the Oswalds come back from Russia. He's a famous defector. He comes back to the United States. He's looking for work, on and on. We know the cover story pretty well. A couple of months before the assassination, Ruth Payne, the wife of Michael Payne, not to confuse it with her mother-in-law, Ruth Payne decides to visit her in-laws in Philadelphia. So she goes up to Philadelphia. We don't know what was discussed that August, that September, that summer vacation that she spent a couple of weeks up north in Philadelphia. We don't know what she talked about, but she had to have talked about the fact that she had Russian defectors living with her. She discusses this, obviously, she must have, with Arthur Young and his wife. Fine. She goes back to Dallas. She gets Lee Oswald the job at the Texas School Book Depository, and the rest is history.
I want to jump in right here. I just tweeted that pic, November 22nd, 1963, with Marina Oswald, Marguerite Oswald, the wife and mother, respectively, of Lee Harvey Oswald, and Ruth Payne, who got Lee Harvey Oswald his job at the Texas School Book Depository, where he allegedly killed JFK. And that is this picture is a heavy, heavy picture. Can we spend, give me 1 minute on this, because it's such an important photograph and what it really means.
Well, it's a stunner for me. I mean, I look at that photograph every once in a while and try to figure out, really, what does that really mean? That constellation of people sitting there. There's on the very far left of the photograph, that's Ruth Paine. And then the woman in the middle, of course, is Marguerite Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald's mother. And then you see Marina Oswald holding the baby. This was taken in, I believe, in Marina's house. In Ruth Paine's home, I think is when this photograph was taken. We don't have a shot of the man. We see his pants legs next to Marina. We believe that was one of the agents who was sent to sit with them and to monitor the situation.
What
Paine.
What are the odds? Let's just talk some mathematics here. What are the odds of these people being in this house on November 22nd, 1963 by chance?
Oh, there's no. I mean, you can't. It's impossible. And the connection of the woman on the left, Ruth Paine, to Arthur Young, to the Nine, to this seance that took place, and the fact that her estranged husband, Michael Paine, is working for Bell Aerospace, whose CEO at this time is Walter Dornberger, the Nazi that we brought over during Operation Paperclip with Werner von Braun. Michael Paine is working for basically Walter Dornberger. Lee Harvey Oswald used to work for the Riley Coffee Company in New Orleans. When he left Riley Coffee, he told all of his coworkers he was going to work for NASA. And other employees of Riley Coffee Company, after Lee Harvey Oswald left, right after the assassination, they got jobs with NASA. What does that mean?
What are the odds?
Oh, the odds are incredible.
They're stupendous. For anybody to say, "Oh, this is all," it just happened that way. There's no connection.
Well, the connection is there in the Warren testimony, and this is what pulled it all together for me. I'm going through the testimony. I'm going through Ruth Paine's testimony, that lady on the left in the photograph. She was the one whose house Marina stayed in, and Lee stayed in it from time to time. And all of this was part of Ruth's entourage. I'm looking through her testimony. She's now giving her testimony in front of the Warren Commission. And Alan Dulles was present.
Yeah, to none other than, say it out loud, Dulles.
Dulles. Alan Dulles is sitting there. Yeah. Alan Dulles, you read that transcript. Anybody can download this, find it anywhere. Read the Ruth Paine transcript. She's about ready to talk about her trip to Philadelphia to meet Arthur Young when Dulles cuts her off. It's so obvious in the transcript. She's starting to bring this up. You can see she's starting to say what happened. I mean, this is crucial information. This is what she was doing the month or two before the assassination. She's going up to Philadelphia. Dulles cuts her off right there, changes the subject to something else, and that whole train of thought gets lost completely. And I sat there and I thought, what the hell happened?
Why would you do that?
What was Dulles afraid of?
Yes, exactly.
And then, of course, I found out. It turns out that Ruth Forbes Paine Young, Arthur Young's wife, the in-laws, Ruth Forbes was the best friend of Mary Bancroft. And Mary Bancroft was the mistress of Alan Dulles for so many years. The connection between Alan Dulles and the Arthur Youngs and the assassination is so tight, you couldn't have scripted this any better. He did not want Ruth Paine to start bringing up Arthur Young, because that would have led to Ruth, that would have led to Mary Bancroft, that would have led to Dulles himself. So he had to scotch that right away. Now, whether it was because he was, embarrassed by his relationship with Mary Bancroft, I kind of doubt it. I think there was another element in there that even Ruth Paine herself, innocently giving her testimony, even she might not have been aware of. She was just, blithely going on, well, I was going up to Philadelphia. Thank you for playing. That's the testament, So it was the end. She could not talk about that again, and it never appears anywhere else in the Warren transcripts. This is crucial. Dulles derailing the interrogation right there of the one woman who was there who got Lee Oswald the job at the depository, cutting off her testimony like that, right there, derailed it. And that's it. Then he starts talking about inanities about income tax or something after that. It was ridiculous.
Did anybody, when putting all of this together, I don't even think Oliver Stone touched upon this much, and he would have definitely written another JFK had he known about all of this too as well. It would have been a different movie. But
It would have been different.
Yeah, it would have been a different movie. But the fact that Oswald managed to learn Russian so fluently that he fooled his Russian wife when he told her that he was actually Russian. And, all of this seems to have gotten lost in history as well.
Well, I can tell you from my personal experience, I've learned a lot of languages in my time. I've had to. And I've learned, a lot of the Romance languages and Asian languages as well. Russian is a bear to learn.
Trust me, I know.
Russian is extremely difficult,
Yes, I do. My family, my in-laws, Russian, and it's gone on 15, 18 years now, and I speak 0 words in Russian. I'm serious, too. I can understand it, but it is a difficult language to even come close to mastering if you're not born in Russia. It's impossible.
Exactly.
So,
and it's one thing to learn it. It's another thing to fool a Russian that you're Russian.
Exactly.
That is quite an accomplishment.
You should see my in-laws start laughing when I speak a word of Russian. It's hysterical. It's embarrassing. That's why I don't mess with it.
Yeah.
I've said way too much, but okay, let's continue.
And Lee was from the Bronx too. I mean, he lived in the Bronx for a while, so let's give the boy a little chance here. But he was surrounded by people. I mean, he had the Arthur Young connection through Ruth Paine on the one hand. He had the Orthodox Church connection with David Ferry, Jack Martin, and all those guys on the other hand. He had the UFO people with Guy Bannister and Fred Chrisman. Lee Harvey Oswald didn't have a chance. I mean, no matter what we may think of him, what we think he was culpable of or guilty of, if anything, he was surrounded by a lot of psychos. This guy was surrounded by some of the strangest but most powerful people that you can imagine, and they were all running intelligence operations. I mean, everybody that he knew seemed to be an intelligence agent. And I'm including Ruth Paine in that
yes
status because of her connection back to Arthur Young and all of that, and the Nine and all the rest of it. This is astonishing stuff. And the more I learn about Lee Oswald, the stranger it gets. We don't know, for instance, that he applied to go to a very bizarre school in Switzerland only months before he defected to Russia. It was a very strange university called the Albert Schweitzer College. I managed to get a copy of the letter that he wrote, his application, a copy of it anyway. I mean, this guy was he was doing weird things. No one had ever heard of this university. It was an elitist little group out there in the middle of Switzerland in the Alps, and he applied to it and was accepted. Lee Oswald was accepted to this university, which only accepted maybe 30 people a year.
And one other point, exactly. That is, I almost don't want to move from that point. But how old was Oswald in 1963?
How old was he? He was in his 20s.
He was like 24, right?
Yeah.
How does somebody do all of that in such a short amount of time? We're talking about all the trips to Russia, to Mexico, get involved, throw in New Orleans, a little segue there. Then you have everything that was going on in Dallas. And
don't forget at Sugi Air Base, don't forget Japan, the Philippines, and Indonesia.
Yes, yeah. and to have the Warren Commission write him off as just a doofus.
Yeah, exactly. It makes no sense at all. The guy was obviously an intelligence asset of some kind.
For many
whether he
people.
was a contract agent or an actual agent, we don't know, but come on,
A triple agent, back and forth. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, okay. Let's take another pause. This is Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network. We're talking with Peter Levenda, who we have risen from the ashes, by the way.
Yes, thank you for raising me from the dead. I appreciate it.
He's alive and well, world. He's with us. And thank you for that. Okay, now let's reset again this story that started, again, Maury Island, Guy Bannister, that entire situation, to the Nine, to Oswald, to the Bishops in the Bronx, to the Astors, to the Forbes, to Young, to Bell Helicopter. It's just a crazy story. So now let's kind of reset with all of the players one more time, and then we'll start to try to tie it all together.
Well, okay, let's just recap in an encapsulated way. We have Maury Island. I mean, Maury Island, there was something happened at Maury Island, whether it was actual UFOs, whether it was some secret aircraft being developed by our department. Who knows? But something took place. There's something very strange. Crisman, who had been an intelligence agent during World War II, is on the scene. Crisman arranges quickly this kind of weird interview with Kenneth Arnold, who saw the other UFOs. He tapes it. It's in a bugged hotel room. The transcript is leaked to the press. Arnold gets angry and disappears. 2 Air Force officers die carrying a box of the rocks that allegedly were debris from the UFO aircraft. Their plane blows up and they're dead. And then we fast forward a couple of years. In 1952, there's a seance in Maine. All of these very wealthy people are there, including Arthur Young, people who would become implicated later in the Kennedy assassination, at least indirectly in some way, to the assassination, with only a handshake or two away from Lee Harvey Oswald. And then in 1952, Jack Parsons dies the same year. Jack Parsons, of course, jump-started our space program back in the 1930s. Crater on the Moon, named after him, founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, held in some reverence at the JPL, even though they knew he was a little weird, a little strange, and had lost his security clearance. Well, guess what? Everybody did. All that group that started the Jet Propulsion Laboratory all came under suspicion during the McCarthy era of being communists. One of their fellows was a Chinese scientist. The Chinese scientist got so pissed off at being accused of being a communist by the McCarthy people, he gave up and went back to China and developed the silkworm rocket that China used so successfully and has exported around the world. So, we cut off the hand that feeds us sometimes. So all of this is going on. This is an intense thing. It's the Cold War. It's the Korean War. We're obsessed with the Soviet Union, obsessed to the point, where we're bringing Nazis into the country to help us. We create an entire Galen organization out there in Germany. Former Nazi spies are now working for CIA, basically jump-starting our anti-Soviet intelligence operations. But as it turns out, we can't trust them. We couldn't even trust the Nazi scientists we had because they were sending secrets back to their compatriots behind the Iron Curtain. The Nazis were remaining in contact with each other, even as they were either working for the Soviet Union or for the United States. They were actually working for each other. The Nazis were had their own agenda. And as I will talk about in my upcoming book that's soon to be released, there's even more evidence that there was a tremendous network of these Nazi scientists, of Nazi intelligence people, military people that survived many years, many decades after the end of World War II. They had their own agenda all this while. They were sabotaging our space program. They were sabotaging the Soviet space program as long as they could until we finally did put somebody on the moon. But we only did that after we got rid of Jack Kennedy. So there's a lot of mystery regarding our space program, a lot of mystery regarding American history itself, but there's a dark hand behind all of it. That's what they call the sinister forces. There is a sinister force at work in American history that has manipulated these events. And there are people who are willing apprentices to this sorcerer, whatever it is, who are carrying out these dastardly deeds. I don't mean to sound too melodramatic about it, but we've lost presidents, we've lost senators, we've lost civil rights leaders, we've lost a lot of important people due to this agenda that runs underneath the face of American politics, underneath the face of American history. Our space program was tainted from the very beginning. Is it linked to something extraterrestrial? I would have thought myself insane to say that even 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But what's been going on, in the last few years, what we've been able to find out about a lot of the things that the American government's been involved with in science, in intelligence operations, in military operations, tends to make you believe there's something to that story, whether it's directly a situation where we're talking about flying saucers from other planets, or we're talking about some very strange technology that perhaps the Germans had been developing, the Nazis had been developing, as Joseph Farrell points out, the Brotherhood of the Bell, some of the weird, experiments the Nazis were carrying out that we were desperate to stop. And the Soviets were also desperate to stop and to seize as many of their scientists as possible because there was a secret technology that was being developed. And presidents cannot be allowed to stand in the way of this.
Yeah, exactly. And to that point, let's not forget we had von Braun, we had supposedly with Paperclip, and we can jump into that in a second because it's an important point to this entire story. story. I don't even know what to call it. That's so lightly. But von Braun, everybody that was important most of the main players out of Nazi Germany, we pulled over every single scientist. Operation Paperclip. I'm going to post a really cool picture of Paperclip and all of those scientists here in a second. With all of that, but yet the Soviets beat us into space with Sputnik, and that plain and simply shouldn't have and couldn't have happened. But they did everything that they could to make sure that we weren't successful in that.
Exactly, they did. We could not trust the people we allegedly had working for us. They did not suddenly become patriotic American citizens. These were people dedicated to our destruction from the beginning, dedicated to the destruction of the Western way of life in general. So there was no way that the Nazis were going to suddenly, become converts to the American way of life. They had their own agenda. They still do. And so, yes, they wanted to help the Soviet Union first, be the first ones to get into space. They wanted to play the Soviet Union and the United States off against each other. That has been their goal since the very beginning, especially since the end of the war. The idea was get the two superpowers to destroy each other, and then Germany comes along and picks up the pieces. And that was part of their agenda. We brought them into our country. We signed a pact with the devil, as far as I'm concerned. We sold our souls to bring these hideous people, these war criminals, into our bosom. Hubertus Struckhold, for instance, the leading Nazi aviation medicine expert who performed experiments on live prisoners in the camps, was brought over to run, our space medicine program. And that leads us again back into the UFO territory because he was stationed at Randolph Air Force Base. And Randolph Air Force Base in Texas is where we have the young Whitley Strieber growing up. And of course, Whitley Strieber is famous for Communion, for that famous movie, and for the idea of alien abduction and all of this. And I've had many long conversations with Whitley, and both in email and over the phone for hours and hours regarding this episode in his life. His father was based there. They were based at Randolph Air Force Base. Is it possible?
And most of the paperclip scientists, the one picture that I'm about to post, wasn't this taken at Randolph?
I think that was Randolph. I think the one that you have is either that or Fort Bliss, but I think it's Randolph.
And
I'm looking for the picture.
Yeah, I'm actually posting it right now. I can't. It's so funny. I can't. Sometimes you have a brain freeze, and I'm doing it right now as I try to spell Randolph.
Right. Well, yeah. Okay. But yeah, that's an idea of what we brought over. People think Paperclip was a handful of scientists. It wasn't. It was hundreds and hundreds of scientists, engineers, rocket scientists, and I give a list during that presentation as to who we brought over, and the list is incredible. Besides Dornberger and von Braun, who we know were both either military or SS, we hired Kurt Debus. Kurt Debus was the first director of the Kennedy Space Center. Kurt Debus, and he was a member of the SS and the SA. The stormtroopers. He had turned in a colleague to the Gestapo. I mean, here was a real winner, Another guy who worked for NASA was Theodore Zobel, who performed experiments on prisoners, live prisoners in wind tunnel operations, right? That was his thing. Struckhold we already talked about.
And Dornberger, what facility do we name after Dornberger?
Well, we named the facility after Struckhold, that I know, at Randolph, and they took the name off because the Daughters of the American Revolution or something protested because they realized Struckhold was a war criminal. So we had named the Center for Aviation Medicine the Hubertus Struckhold Center for Aviation Medicine. And that lasted for about a week until everybody screamed and said, "You got to take this down."
I thought we named something off the Dornberger in Florida, one of the flight centers.
Oh, maybe there is. I don't.
I could be wrong too, but I thought we made that mistake too as well. Maybe not, but it would surprise me.
Well, it's Dornberger and von Braun who go to Dayton, Ohio. I mean, for Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They're there the same month. They arrive at the same month that the so-called Roswell debris is taken there. So there's another confluence of events. The Roswell crash takes place. Which to this day, we're still debating what the relevance of that. But the debris from that crash, for some reason, is transported to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I think it wasn't called Wright-Patterson yet. I think it might have been just Wright Air Force Base.
Wright Field.
And Dornberger.
Right.
Yeah, Wright Field.
Yes.
That's it, Wright Field. And that was Dornberger and Werner von Braun were sent there. They arrived at the same time the space debris did, the Roswell debris did. You know, what's up with that? I mean, what does that mean? You know, but it means something. You know, were they brought there to investigate it, to examine it, to give their opinion about it? Were they going to be interrogated? Was this their aircraft? Who knows? But we're never going to know because those files are gone. You know, they've been deep sixed like so much else of that period. So that period of the 1940s and 1950s, there is a wealth of information that'll turn your hair white if you go through it. There's just things that you can't believe were going on, were taking place, all in the name of the Cold War and, you know, our determination to defeat the Soviet Union and, of course, China. And the Korean War was taking place as well. All of this is going on. When all these things are happening, the seances, Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, all of this stuff is going on at the same time in the 1950s during the Cold War. By the 1960s, the players were in place. You know, Kennedy came along and upset that apple cart, and he was effectively gotten rid of.
This is Fade to
the
Black.
only way they knew how.
This is Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your humble host, Jimmy Church. We're talking with Peter Levenda about the secret space program, his definition of the secret space program, which is a crazy one. And right there, that's where I'm going to segue. Why couldn't Kennedy must have, as all of this is going across his desk, not only with the bishops and the Browns and the FBI and Hoover and von Braun and his efforts with the space program throughout the 60s, we all know about that. Couldn't Kennedy reel all of these guys back in and get this back on track? Or was it completely out of his hands as well?
It was out of his hands. I mean, I think we're starting to learn now, as Americans, we're gradually coming to understand that our elected officials are, you know, that's in a sense, I don't want to go completely against the American dream here, but there's a lot of window dressing that takes place with our American political process. Money talks. Powerful corporations have a lot to say about things. Our intelligence people can sometimes run rogue. After Watergate, of course, they tried to do what they could to revamp the CIA completely. As an example, they put Admiral Turner in and Night of the Long Knives. All kinds of people were fired.
Mm-hmm.
All kinds of things go on because, you know, these organizations are self-defending. They will try to defend themselves as long as possible. They'll lose sight of what they're really there for. But as far as corporations are concerned, Eisenhower warned us about a military-industrial complex. It's more than that. It's a military-industrial political complex at this point. If you look at the American budget, it's basically a defense program and an insurance program. People say basically the United States is an insurance company with guns. That's basically what we've come down to. So what power does an individual person, even elected as president of the United States, what power do they really have? Nobody listened to Truman. They brought in the Nazis anyway. Nobody listened to Kennedy when he said, screw this, we're not going to go and invade Cuba. Nobody listened to him then. The generals decided on their own they were not going to listen to him. They wanted to go to war in Vietnam. They wanted to extend the wars against in Asia and Southeast Asia. They were dead set on it, and Kennedy was against it, although he had been for it and then he was against it. All of these things were going on. There was just too much at stake. The defense industry was at stake. The complex, the military-industrial complex was at stake. And the people who were the keepers of the secrets, people like Allen Dulles, who survived everybody, you know, who survived being fired by Kennedy, you know, over the Bay of Pigs. Kennedy hated Dulles, and yet Dulles was on the Warren Commission deciding who shot him.
Right.
Does that make any sense in the world?
No. And then eventually had an airport named after him.
Oh yeah, right.
You know,
and and look at that. You know, here was somebody that Kennedy thought was the epitome of evil.
Right.
And you know, he's the guy in charge of investigating his murder.
Yep.
Come on.
Yep.
You know, at that point, you sit back and say, okay, now we know what's going on, right?
Well, that begs to question. We all wonder what Kennedy really meant when he said, you know, secret societies in that famous speech.
Yes, that famous speech.
Yeah, and now looking at all of this, what do you think? I know this is kind of a softball question thrown at you, but I just need your opinion. What do you think Kennedy was referring to?
Well, I think initially he was referring especially to Dulles and his people. I mean, that was a secret society within a secret society. The Dulles brothers and the people around Dulles formed a cabal within CIA, within the intelligence community, within the State Department. There was they ran their own show. And no matter who, these are not elected officials. Dulles wasn't elected. John Foster Dulles wasn't elected. These were appointees. And appointees or not, they ran their own show. You couldn't you couldn't unelect them. They had never been elected. You couldn't vote them out of office.
Right.
So they had the power. They stayed. They had tremendous staying power in state, in defense, in CIA, in all of these places that were so important. When George W. Bush was elected president, who did he name to all the important positions in intelligence and the military? Former members of Skull and Bones, people that belonged to the same secret society he did. The chances of that happening were astronomical if they were by chance. I did those numbers for Sinister Forces. I just ran the numbers. They only bring in 16 people a year into Skull and Bones, as an example. 16 people a year. So how do you get 3 or 4 of them in positions of power in the Bush White House?
Very carefully. Very carefully.
Well, yeah, exactly, yeah. That wasn't an accident, right? So this is what I think Kennedy was afraid of. He was afraid of this kind of thing. He had his own issues. He had a lot of other stuff going on, but the whole secret society thing, the manipulation of our political process, I think that's what he was afraid of. I think that's what he was warning people about. Basically, like Eisenhower was warning about a military-industrial complex. By the time Kennedy was president, it had gone on steroids. Suddenly, Bell Helicopter is deciding we have to stay in Vietnam because we have to sell a lot more helicopters.
Right. I wanted to back up real quick. We left one key thing out, and that was Hoover's connection to the church in the Bronx. We left that part out, which is it's an insane. all of this, the Astors, the Youngs, the Forbes, Bannister. It's all crazy. L. Ron Hubbard, Jack Parsons, all of it is, and how it all fits together is nuts. But we left out one of the craziest parts, which is J. Edgar Hoover and this church and the FBI. Yeah. So let's back up and let's place that piece of the puzzle into the puzzle.
Well, when I was at the church, Profeta had bragged to me, as I mentioned, that he had FBI and CIA on the board of directors of his church. I have not been able to find that. That paperwork is kind of missing. But one thing that he did brag about was his close relationship to Hoover. And I thought, well, I was a kid, and he's this old guy, this old Ukrainian guy with all these connections in politics and stuff. I didn't really doubt it. And then, but I didn't know what to make of it. It was only later that I found out that Hoover had the final say on who was going to be a bishop in that church. It's Hoover who had to conduct the background investigations, and the guy he used to do that was Jack Martin. Now, I talked to other bishops who were still alive, at least up until a couple of years ago. I did a lot of running around talking to these guys and getting them to go on the record. And they said, yes, basically, if you wanted to stay in the American Orthodox Catholic Church, you had to go to the Bronx, basically kiss the ring of J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover himself would decide whether or not you could stay in the church or not. Therefore, it wasn't a church, obviously. But that's the condition that Profeta made. The head of the church said, you have to be cleared by the FBI. Jack Martin's job was as an investigator. He really was an investigator. He was not this kind of drunken fool that he's made out to be all the time. Martin ran around a lot, all through the United States. We don't know how he was funded, but he did investigations. If you wanted to know about anybody, background on anyone, you went to Jack, and Jack, within the space of about 24 hours, would give you the file on this person. He would know everything there was to know. So some of the other bishops made use of Jack. When they were bringing other people into the quote-unquote church, they'd call Jack, and Jack Martin would do the investigation and come up with the names, come up with the background. That's what he did. That's what the bishops told me. They were not aware of the Kennedy assassination stuff because they really weren't hip to all of that. When I met them, they were sort of, old and, thinking about other things. But when I started to bring up, Jack Martin, David Ferry, they knew all about Ferry. They knew all about Martin, Profeta, the link with J. Edgar Hoover. All of this was known to them. I tried to get Freedom of Information Act information out of the FBI on Profeta, and I'm always told there are no such records, A search through our files has revealed nothing. And I can't believe that because I was there. I was there when the feds would show up at the church in their wingtips and their white shirts and dark suits and go into the room and talk to Profeta for a couple of hours. I mean, I was always there when the FBI was there. I was there when they ran, various people from different countries into the church for these spurious ordinations and these ordination certificates, these beautifully illuminated documents on sheepskin with the wax seals proclaiming them bishop of this and bishop of that. The Italians sent a guy over. I mean, the Italian embassy was there. The Nigerians, as I mentioned. All of this was going through the church. So every time I went to the FBI and said, I need more information about this, they said, no, it doesn't exist, nothing to see here, move along, So this might have been a Hoover thing on his own. Hoover might have been using the church as his own kind of, covert ops organization, not only in the United States, but overseas, especially overseas. One of the other bishops of this church, a man I knew personally very well, who was a count from Yugoslavia, to bring up Yugoslavia again,
right.
Wound up working for, wound up involved in the Bosnian Civil War deal. The Italian Secret Service had a file on it. All of these guys were operatives. They were all operatives. They were all working for one or other intelligence organization in the United States, whether it was FBI or CIA or some combination, who knows. They were all working.
You have got to be looking over your shoulder all day long. I don't know how you do it. And
well, it's publish or perish, quite literally.
Yeah, right.
As long as I'm published, I'm in the light. So it's hard to,
I'm with you on that. I'm totally with you. I'm totally with you with this program. Before I ask the next obvious question, which is, does the secret space program still exist? Are we still infiltrated by the Nazis, and are they trying to stymie us at every turn? When you think about that we haven't returned to the moon or done anything else since then, it kind of makes you want to scratch your head. So before we get to that, have you had weird experiences walking out of your house, strange cars out front? Have you been followed, phones tapped? Okay, there's 5 questions.
Well, I'll boil it down for you. The short answer is yes. As far as phone taps and that sort of thing, that used to happen a lot in the old days. What did happen, a very mysterious, a very bizarre experience that I'll never forget. I was living in New England at the time. This was the time of the first Gulf War. One of the strangest experiences I've ever had. I had gone shopping. I had come back to the house. I was unloading groceries from my car. And as I'm doing that, I look up and I see, the quintessential, the iconic black Cadillac of 1950s or 1960s vintage, and somebody in the driver's seat pointing a wide-angle lens at me.
Oh, shut up! Really?
I'm serious.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Fedora too.
Well, I mean, it was just so strange. I mean, I stared at this apparition. This is a country road. It's not like it was a main drag. There wasn't like a lot of traffic. There wasn't a gas station or anything.
Right.
Just a couple of houses on a hill. And this car is parked, or it just stopped, not officially parked, but stopped right in front of the house. And they're pointing this camera at me. So I put down the box of groceries that I have, and I start approaching the car. The car speeds off. So I'm psyched at this point. I'm getting in my car. I want to pull out and follow them. And as I get to my car, another car shows up.
Okay, what year was this? What year?
First Gulf War, which would have been, 1990?
91. So a vintage
91,
Cadillac,
yeah.
and I'm picturing this, a vintage Cadillac black in 1991 stands out.
Yep.
You know what you're looking at. Okay, there
Right.
you go. Okay, so now another car pulls up. Go ahead. You jump in to chase this guy.
Another car pulls up to block me from leaving. So I can't get out now because this other car has suddenly pulled into my driveway. And it's like a normal car. I didn't really take much notice of it. 2 women come out. One woman from the driver's side, one from the passenger side, which is very unusual. They get out of the car and they ask me directions. And they're asking me directions to a company or to a street or to a name called DeVilbiss, DeVilbiss, DeVilbiss. I remember that striking name because I had heard it previously as the name of a company out in the Midwest. It's a long story, but I had heard the name. Somebody had mentioned to me in passing. And now this woman is talking about a DeVilbiss. She's looking for a DeVilbiss. And she's very patient. She's looking at me with these sort of haunting eyes, like this expression, like a zombie-like, expression. And I say, no, I don't know of any DeVilbiss. And they slowly get back into their car and drive off. Naturally, they've ruined my chase of the black Cadillac. So I'm just shocked by it. So I do a search. There was no such name as DeVilbiss in the entire state that I was living in.
Oh,
that did not exist.
Oh, man.
So they had picked this name out of somewhere. And, out of the ether or something.
Right.
And they picked a name that they knew I would never know.
Right.
And they're right there. They're blocking me. I can't get out. So there was a 2-car operation, one guy with a camera and a black Cadillac. I mean, a black Cadillac? Are you kidding me? Really? You're going to do the Men in Black thing? I mean, seriously? But that's what they were doing. And I just don't know why. I don't know if it was connected to the Gulf War because I had been investigating stuff for, years. Maybe they suspected I was, I don't know, some kind of a Iraqi soldier. I don't know. I have no clue. But for some reason, these guys came and took my picture, and then they kept me from leaving. 2 cars, that's an expensive operation for an intelligence operation. You're putting 2 cars and 4 people,
what about
for one day?
Yeah. What about DeVilbiss? What was the significance of that? You had said that it came up a couple of months prior.
Yeah, there was a company out in the Midwest that I was involved in selling equipment at one point, and they were a possible candidate as a customer for this type of equipment, which was process control stuff and everything. They made, machines or something. And so it had come up in passing. Somebody had said, oh, maybe check this company out. They might be a good lead for you. And so I got that information, and,
see what that says to me.
Came of it.
No, what that says to me is they had been investigating you for a while, and they made a connection to DeVilbiss. And I mean, that I've never even heard that name ever. That is a very unique. I mean, why not pick Bartholomew? Just some crazy, not
sure.
So DeVilbiss. So
this was very specific.
Yeah, very specific. So you were being checked out quite deeply too, as well. And for DeVilbiss just to be some sales contact a couple of months prior. It was just them telling me that they were onto me. They were onto you.
Just them telling me that they were watching. That's what it had to mean.
Wow.
But why, I don't know.
That's creepy.
Specifically, why? By the 1990s, it could have been anything. I investigated so many things by that time, in so many different parts of the world that it could have been anything. So I had been already to China for a long time, made many trips out there, stayed there for months. I had been through, parts of Southeast Asia, parts of Europe. I mean, it could have been anything. I mean, I didn't know what they were after at that point, but it was a security issue. So freaky.
Creepy.
But the Men in Black thing is what freaked me.
Yeah, that's creepy.
Vintage black Cadillac. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Joke?
Yeah. So where are we today with the secret space program?
Well, to answer your question that you brought up initially, is where are we today? Are the Nazis still at it? Yeah. They haven't given up. I mean, we're facing now the threat of global terrorism, ostensibly anyway. At least that's what our news people are telling us. We're facing this like never before. We don't really understand that the roots of it go all the way back to the First World War, go back to Germany, particularly to World War II. We don't realize that because we brought Nazis, war criminals, not just Germans, but war criminals, into our country. We integrated them into our intelligence operations. We integrated them into our engineering and space programs, integrated them into our military. We didn't understand that this would form a network that would operate against us. And at the same time, they're operating in the Middle East. They're helping to build rockets for NASA to fire into Israel. They're helping to teach interrogation and torture techniques all around the world. They're doing this everywhere. They formed alliances with Islamic-style terrorism everywhere. They financed it. We had the case of an Austrian governor who died mysteriously in a car accident, a very right-wing pro-Nazi governor, recently, a couple of years ago only, in this century. And it was discovered after he died that he had been receiving enormous sums of money from Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi before his death. The right wing, the extreme right, is what I'm talking about, the pro-Nazi right, has been in bed with Islamic terrorism for a long time. They have mutual enemy, which would be Israel and Jews in general, but they have the bigger enemy, which is the West in general. We know that we're being targeted because of, there's this idea that Western culture is decadent and it's this and it's that. This was the German concept from the beginning as well. Germany, the Nazis felt that they represented the third way. Neither United States nor Soviet Union. This was a third way. This was their own way. And this third way concept has taken on in a lot of the developing world, and it's especially taken on in the Middle East, this idea that it's a plague on both your houses. We're going to create our own system, our own a method, our own government. I mean, one of the people who helped inspire the Muslims in general to revisit the idea of the caliphate, to form a united kingdom stretching from the Middle East all the way to Southeast Asia, was none other than Hitler's former Reichsbank minister, Hjalmar Schacht. Schacht was the guy who arranged the financing for the Nazi Party. He's the guy who managed to rearm Nazi Germany when they were not supposed to be rearming. He was the guy who found all these different ways to get money and to buy supplies from abroad secretly and all the rest of it. He was at Nuremberg. He was slapped on the wrist. He got out and he started going to the third world, the quote-unquote third world, the developing countries, everywhere from Egypt and the Middle East all the way to Indonesia, convincing countries to form a caliphate, which would then defend, themselves against the communists in China and in the Soviet Union. So he was doing his number out there, and we were doing the same thing. Eisenhower once brought up in the Oval Office, and the transcripts are there, where he was suggesting that maybe we could convince the Muslims to go on a holy war. And if they went on a holy war against the Soviet Union, wouldn't that be great? Well, and it was Dulles saying, well, they could turn against us.
Right.
And Eisenhower saying, well, let's not worry about that because I talked to the king of Saudi Arabia and he's a good friend.
Right.
That was Eisenhower's geopolitical strategy right there.
And the point needs to be made. The Nazis were not a government that we defeated. That's not what the Nazi is a belief. It's
absolutely.
Yeah, it's in their heart. It has nothing to do. You bring down the Third Reich, the government that was there, but that had nothing to do with the nearly religious belief that these guys had in their hearts. That left with them when they left Germany and came over to here. That's what stayed with them.
And they came over here. They came over to Latin America. They came over to the Middle East. They came over to Asia. They brought this sort of virus, this cult with them wherever they went. These are true believers. They were not going to give up. They had converted to this ideology. They were converts to Nazism. Defeat in a war meant nothing to them. They had planned since 1944 how to survive the end of the war. They were making preparations. They were sending money abroad, sending gold abroad. IG Farben was setting up subsidiaries. They had over 750 subsidiaries around the world when the war ended. There was no destruction of IG Farben or Thyssen or Krupp or anybody else. They had put all their money and technology overseas. When the Allies finally went into Germany, there was nothing left.
Were you?
We didn't defeat this ideology. You can't defeat an ideology.
No, you
that,
can't.
Not with guns.
No, you can't. Were you able to connect anything to Operation High Jump?
Well, yeah, and that goes back to Marguerite Oswald, believe it or not.
Okay.
Let me just drop that on you because this is also too bizarre to even consider.
It's been one of those
There was
shows.
an American. Oh, this is strange. You're not going to believe this at all, but if you look it up, you'll find it. There was an American. He might have passed away recently. A guy called Keith Thompson, Keith Thompson, an American raised in the United States, who became an agent of the German secret police, the Sicherheitsdienst, the Secret Service, during the war. Just before the war, actually, he was a card-carrying member of the Nazi Party, had taken an oath of loyalty to Hitler. World War II breaks out. He's in some function during the war. Once World War II is over, he's with Operation High Jump down there in the Antarctic. We don't know what the hell Operation High Jump was all about. That makes no sense in the world.
Right.
We had just ended World War II. Everybody was exhausted financially, militarily, everything else. We send a whole, flotilla, a whole convoy of ships down to the Antarctic for scientific research purposes, quote unquote. All right. H. Keith Thompson was part of Operation High Jump, very proud member of that operation. A Nazi, a believing, loyal to the Fuhrer Nazi. Comes back, gets involved with the entire Nazi underground in Latin America, in the Middle East, in Europe, all the famous names he knew personally. He was on speaking terms with everyone. And he becomes the literary agent of Marguerite Oswald.
No.
Yes.
Serious?
Serious. I am not making this up.
It gets stranger and stranger and stranger.
Yeah.
He
becomes the person in charge of all of her personal effects, of all of Lee Oswald's stuff that she still has. He becomes the person who's going to sell it for her, maybe arrange for a book and all the rest of it. He becomes her literary executor and her agent, basically her literary agent. H. Keith Thompson, same guy, Operation High Jump guy, the same guy involved as a Nazi Party member, the same guy who said that he took an oath to the Fuhrer he would never go back on and on and on. A dedicated Nazi, involved with the Nazi underground, with Odessa, basically a member of Odessa, one of the functionaries of Odessa. And he was Marguerite Oswald, literary executive. I mean,
I can't even, my head just exploded. My frontal lobes just went, how, again, what are the odds? I don't even know. How can this come to be? I mean, and what were the reasons for it? That's the question. I mean, that's where we're at with that. Why?
If there was a Nazi cabal of some kind out to destroy Kennedy, they would want to make sure that all of whatever Marguerite had was in their possession, that it was sanitized, and that nothing embarrassing would have gotten out. So it makes sense to me from looking at it now from a distance, I can see why that would have happened. Or maybe he was working for American intelligence. Either way, this was a way to make sure they had everything they wanted, that she wasn't holding back anything. Because he would go there with promises, we're going to make you a fortune, we're going to make a lot of money, show me everything, basically. And that's basically what Marguerite did.
Are you going to tell me now that there's phone transcripts between Alan Dulles and H. Keith Thompson?
I don't think Alan would have been that careless.
Well, I don't know if he's that far removed either. Wow.
Well, no, he wouldn't have been, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's right there in the mix.
Yes. Unbelievable. You know what? Yeah. I want you to hang out for a few minutes. I'm going to open up the phone lines. There's which I haven't done yet. 323-825-5045. If anybody would like to call in and speak to the resurrected, the Phoenix, the Phoenix, Peter Levenda, give us a quick call, 323-825-5045. And I'll take this opportunity now. What's your new book about? I know that you said it's being printed now.
Yes.
You've been to 5 continents. How many years of research? And I know it involves Hitler. And wish we would have had you a couple of weeks ago, but I couldn't resurrect you in time.
You had to have the right book, the right grimoire, the right incantations. But well, the book is it's called The Hitler Legacy, and what I'm writing about, it's the continuation of the work that I started with Unholy Alliance and with Ratline. It's the third book, I guess. I didn't plan it that way, but it became the third book in a trilogy. And The Hitler Legacy picks up where Ratline and Holy Alliance leave off. It talks about the reality of Odessa. Odessa has become this kind of catchword that people don't believe in anymore. It's kind of a movie term and, a fictional idea of a Nazi network. And a lot of historians have poo-pooed the idea of there being a real Nazi underground or a real group called Odessa. But there have been documents that have surfaced recently, American intelligence documents, plus documents from other countries, which show that there was indeed, and still is, an Odessa. And we use that as a kind of catch-all term for the Nazi underground in general. There were a lot of different groups. But the Nazi underground was lethal, much more lethal than it appears in the film or in the book by Frederick Forsyth. Odessa was involved with arms dealers, with huge amounts of money, with gold that had been smuggled around the world to finance a kind of Fourth Reich. So all of this was in play, has been in play, and is still in play. And the Hitler Legacy is about that. It's about why we took our eye off the ball. We did not prosecute Nazi war criminals. We embraced them quite often. We helped them. We helped them to escape. We covered for them. And what we did was basically bring a viper into our bosom, as you might say. And this underground that we thought was going to help us against communism turned around and then threw their support behind global terrorism. So my book is about how this began, how it started, and how basically the Islamist terrorist groups, you might call them the jihadists, all these terms are inadequate, but let's just call them jihadists for the time being, how they were actually misled from the beginning. They were manipulated by first German intelligence and then American intelligence. They were manipulated to be used as a weapon against the Soviet Union. And we made that mistake. We created this. We created the idea of a global holy war, of global jihad. When I say we, I mean in this case, World War I. It goes back to a strange archaeologist, a guy called Max von Oppenheim, who went to the Kaiser of Germany, to Kaiser Wilhelm, and later to the Sultan of Turkey, and said, wouldn't it be cool if you could proclaim a global, the first ever jihad against the whole world, against all the enemies of Islam? Because that's going to help us fight the British and the French and the Russians in World War I. And the Sultan went along with it. They were pretty corrupt by that time. They went along with this deal. There was some financial stuff going on as well. There was a railway they were going to build between Berlin and Baghdad that was at the heart of this as well. All of this goes on because the Germans decided it would be cool to have a global jihad, the first ever jihad against the whole world, created by the West, created by the Germans to manipulate Muslims into fighting the English, the French, and the Russians.
They led Husseini. Husseini had like his own airline to Berlin. You know what I mean? His presence there was how do I want to? Because it was such a different thing to have the Middle East involved with anything that was going on. The Middle East was a little bit backwards to us back then. You know,
sure.
Sabers and swords and camels is how we looked at it. And then and brought Husseini right in, made him a member of the SS, and then Saddam Hussein modeled all of his army and regime after that. Let's bang out of our first call. Hi, you're live on Fade to Black with Peter Levenda. Who's calling? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Jimmy, it's Jonas from New York. How are you?
Hi, Jonas from New York. How are you tonight, sir? Say hi to Peter.
Peter,
Hi.
how are you, sir? Nice to talk to you.
Great. Nice. My pleasure.
What have you got
on your mind?
Sorry, I'll go. I was wondering if Peter could maybe talk about the time you went down to South America and possibly infiltrated a Nazi encampment or facility or hotel. I'll take my answer off the air. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonah.
Thank you.
Great question.
Yeah, well, that was the beginning of this whole quest. I was researching what would become eventually Unholy Alliance, and I decided I had heard rumors about a weird Nazi encampment or estate down in Chile. And this was the time of Pinochet. He had taken over. Salvador Allende had been overthrown. Nixon and Kissinger had decided that a Marxist president was no good. The transcripts of the Oval Office now revealed they had planned to depose him since the very beginning. So Allende was overthrown. Pinochet is in power. And part of the power behind Pinochet was a Nazi sanctuary in the Andes Mountains called Colonia Dignidad, the Colony of Righteousness. And this was a group that had been founded by a former Luftwaffe medic, which served as a safe house for Odessa. Everybody went through Colonia Dignidad. I mean, I'm finding more and more about it every day because now the Chilean government and the Chilean journalists are revealing more and more about this operation. I went down there in 1979. I just walked in, basically. I hired a taxi in a small town called Parral, which is outside of the colony. We went up. They told me not to go. They said it was very dangerous, that people went in, didn't come out. But, I was young and foolish, and I said, no, let's try it. So I went up there, and I was apprehended. I mean, electronic gates closed on me. Guys came out of the woods, armed men. They took my passport. They took the film out of my camera. It was a very harrowing experience. My driver, local Chilean guy, was freaking out. He thought he would not get out alive. They started asking him questions, asking him how long I had been there, how many were there, on and on. Stories
what was
about me. They thought I was an Israeli commando or something.
Sure. What was the nationality of your apprehenders?
German. They were all German.
They were all German.
They were all German. It was a German colony. It was sometimes referred to that way, La Colonia Alemania. It was a German colony specifically for this group of people who had come from Germany, and en masse, they went to Chile, set up this operation there. They would occasionally kidnap local Chilean children. The guy who ran this place was a pedophile, among other wonderful characteristics. He was a pedophile. He would abscond, with these children. They were told never to speak Spanish again. They could only speak German. There have been interviews with them since that time. They don't speak Spanish anymore. They can only conduct interviews in German. These are Chilean kids who've grown up on the colony. They suffered terrible abuse. But that was only part of the story. The deeper part of the story that I was interested in, that I had heard of first, was that they did torture and interrogation at the colony. They tortured political prisoners there. And the torture and interrogation cells have been discovered. Once Pinochet was out of power, it took a long time for that to happen.
Right.
The colony was raided by the Chilean security forces, and my God, they came up with so much stuff. They came out with weapons. They came out with poison gas. There was chemical gas research taking place on the premises.
Weren't there a bunch of children freed too as well?
Yes.
Yes.
There were a lot of children some were freed. Some don't know where to go. Some have no families anymore.
Right.
The Chilean government themselves doesn't know what to do with them.
Right.
I recommend you look on YouTube. There's a very good documentary on the colony. I saw it for the first time this past year, and it brought back all the memories in a rush. I saw the entrance to the colony and the things that I had seen. It's very good. It's about an hour or so long, and it's both in Spanish and in English, so I recommend you to search that out. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. This was part of Operation Condor, which was an international Latin American operation between a lot of countries to find and kill communists wherever in the world they might happen to be. They carried out assassinations, terror bombings. All the stuff that we're putting up with today started with the Odessa, with the Nazi underground. They're the ones who were blowing up train stations and subways long before any jihadists did it in Europe. They were blowing up train stations in Madrid, in Germany, in England. They were doing all of these terrorist operations were being carried out by the pro-Nazi faction first. And they were the ones who trained the Islamists in how to do that. I mean, Yasser Arafat was trained by Nazis in Egypt, for instance. This goes back it's a continuum of a political ideology, which is a kind of an ambiguous one. We know what it's against. We don't really know what it's for, but we know what it's against. It's against, the West in general. It's against Russia as well. And it's in favor of setting up an independent kingdom, a Khalifa, the Caliphate. So this is all part of it. The place I was at in Chile in 79 just reinforced to me the fact that this was a real and present danger. This was a real and imminent threat to everyone. It was a threat to South America, certainly. It was also a threat to us. What I learned in Chile was that this place was being financed by money coming from the United States as well as from Germany, as well as from other places in Europe. And this was a very well-run, very wealthy operation, and still is. I mean, the child abuse has had to stop. The Chilean government is all over that place. But the documents they seized have never seen the light of day. The Chilean Supreme Court will not release these documents. Other people have gone there and disappeared, such as Mark Weissweiler, an American of Russian ancestry who was hiking in the woods at some distance from the colony, by the way, who was arrested by Chilean security forces, brought to the colony, and was never seen again. His family is still looking for him. They're still demanding answers from the Chilean government, and the Chilean government has not been forthcoming. They don't want to answer this question.
How long were you in their custody?
Oh, not long. I was only there for about an hour or so.
Were you?
Yeah.
I obviously you weren't comfortable, but did you feel threatened? Like if I'm serious.
Yeah, they took my passport. They kept it for about a half an hour. I don't know what they did with it. They did, they didn't physically harm me. I think the problem is, I was extremely lucky, and the reason is they were voting in Germany that weekend on whether or not to extend the statute of limitations on war crimes.
Right.
They may have thought that I was there to provoke them into some action or to do something, that I might have had a connection back there. So they let me go. But when I say let me go, they let me go with a warning telling me to get out of the country, that I wasn't welcome in the country of Chile, not just on their estate, but in the country in general. When I got back, I got a bus.
Hold on. Yeah, that's my question. How long did you stay in Chile after they let you go?
Well, they told me to get out of town. They told me to get out of the country immediately.
Right. And you did?
I got back. Well, I kind of had to. I got back into Parral, the town that I left from. I got the bus back to Santiago, the capital where I was staying. And as the bus is going along the highway back to Santiago, there are roadblocks. And at every roadblock, soldiers come on to the bus and they ask for me by name.
Ooh.
They ask the bus driver. Chilean soldiers asking the bus driver, is Levenda on the bus?
Ooh.
So the guy would just nod his head, point to me, they'd look at me, they'd nod, and they'd go back off the bus. When I got back to my hotel room in Santiago, there was a note waiting for me telling me which flight I was on. So I didn't really have much of a choice.
No, I spent some time down in Central America, and I'm telling you right now, in a dictatorship. And when you are on, trust me, that your life is not in your control.
No, it no longer is. You have no rights.
No. Listen, really quick, I got to get back to a bunch of these questions that are passing me up really quick. What was the name of that documentary?
Goodness, it's called, I think, Colonia Dignidad. If you Google it on YouTube, if you search on YouTube, you'll find it right away. It's a very long documentary. It's one of the first ones that'll show up.
Okay.
So if you type in Colonia Dignidad, you'll find it.
Okay, got that. Next, these are just banging past me really quick. Ask if he ever had any proof on Schwabenland down in Antarctica, if it still exists.
No, that was part of the function of Operation High Jump.
Right.
Was to find that. So I don't have any evidence. I don't have any proof. And Keith Thompson wasn't talking. So I don't know. I don't know what they found or didn't find. I just think the entire expedition made no sense whatsoever. It was an extremely expensive operation. It took millions and millions of dollars and a lot of men, thousands of men, and a lot of ships. The whole flotilla went down there, stayed there for a little while, and came back. I don't know if they were looking for Hitler. There were rumors that he had gone on a submarine and gone on down there. There were all these rumors about it. I mean, there had been expeditions by the Nazis in the 1930s to Antarctica. So they may have thought there was some kind of cache of weapons or gold or secret weapons, secret stuff, who knows, technology, or Hitler himself. Because the government, Hoover himself, go back to J. Edgar Hoover, did not believe that Hitler had died in the bunker. So he kept an open file on Adolf Hitler for years. He was collecting any kind of sighting of Hitler anywhere. He was convinced that Hitler had escaped. Stalin had been convinced Hitler had escaped. A lot of people were convinced. There were news reports out of Japan that American expeditionary forces, after they had landed in Japan and occupied Japan, were looking for Hitler in Japan because there had been stories that he had been in Japan. So there's newspaper reports. They exist of American forces looking for Adolf Hitler in Japan. So go figure.
Yeah, well, they did it for reason. He didn't die in Berlin. It's that obvious. What do you think about Harry Cooper's research about Hitler in Argentina and living through the 50s? And I think he said he died in 1963. I think.
I have no problem with imagining Hitler in Argentina. If we go through the FBI files, there were a lot of sightings of Hitler. There were a lot of places where he could have been. And Admiral Dönitz, who then became the head of the Third Reich after Hitler's supposed suicide, had proclaimed that they had found a paradise for Hitler to escape to. I mean, they had arranged for Hitler to escape years before the end of the war.
Right.
And Dönitz said his submarine people would make sure that Hitler survived in a place where he would be welcomed and where he would thrive after the war. And Dönitz was proud of this. I mean, he announced it in his speech to naval cadets. My own work in Ratline tended to suggest that perhaps Hitler did not stay in Argentina for very long because he was surrounded by people who would drop a dime on him in a heartbeat.
Right.
He could no longer trust his generals, obviously because of the plot to kill him in July of 1944, Operation Valkyrie. He couldn't trust Himmler anymore because Himmler had betrayed him as far as he was concerned. So he was surrounded by people who would turn him in or betray him. I came up with this idea because I had been told this when I was in Indonesia, that there was a strong rumor that Hitler had gone to Indonesia after the war, and that there was a man who had lived on a remote island who was identical to Hitler, looked like Hitler. He had a blonde wife who looked like Eva Braun, and they lived on this remote island in Indonesia and died there. So I began to research that story, and I found evidence that indeed, a German, or an Austrian, actually, to be specific, did go to Indonesia, did live on this remote island with a wife of the same extraction, a European woman, a blonde woman, did live there for a while, died there, and was buried in a cemetery in Indonesia. And I visited the cemetery, and I found the tomb, and I have photographs of myself taken by the tomb, and I wrote about this in Ratline, that there was strong evidence that Hitler would have chosen a Muslim country on the other side of the world as the safest place for him to go, that he could not stay in Argentina very long because he couldn't trust the Germans there.
I remember
trust the Odessa people. Yeah.
I remember that in Ratline. What was the name on the tomb?
The name of the tomb was Poch, P-O-C-H.
Right.
Georg Anton Poch.
Right.
But there was no birth date and no death date.
Right.
The dates were missing. I mean, who puts up a tombstone with no dates on it? Especially in a Muslim country where the dates are extremely important. And he was buried in a Muslim cemetery. The word is he had converted to Islam at the very end. So he was buried as a Muslim in a Muslim cemetery. And yet there's no indication as to the year he was born or when he died, for obvious reasons. They don't know who he was.
What do you think about when you were in, and then I'll let you go. I could, somebody just tweeted, by the way, we should do Peter Levenda week.
Well, we're trying to cram a lot into a short time.
Oh, man. Well, we knew that today, too, and I'm glad that we were able to stay focused. It's so difficult because, and again, I had to point this out to everybody, our audience, in the very, very beginning. This story goes all over the place, but it is tied together with just a few different people from generations too. If you think about it, we go through the 40s,
Sure.
the 50s, the 60s, into the 70s, and every seminal event in American history after World War II seems to be infiltrated by a couple of dozen people, and they all knew each other. And they were all...
That's the strangest thing.
Yeah, they were all con artists. They were all FBI agents. They were double agents. And they were into not only ET and UFOs and ufology and the rocket program, but they were also psychics. And they were... It's just like the craziest story ever.
And fake bishops all over the place.
Yeah, and funny hats.
And funny hats, man.
Okay, so when you were in Chile, when you were down there, did it smell of Hitler and Argentina? I mean, and what I mean by that is,
God, yeah,
was that
Absolutely.
the
I know what you
undercurrent?
mean.
Yeah.
It wasn't. It was in your face. I mean, the Chilean army dresses in the Wehrmacht style helmets. You know, they're very distinctive helmets. They goose step. They have a dagger that says "My honor is loyalty." I mean, these guys were idolaters of the Nazi Party. One of the ambassadors of Chile to India and Nepal, as well as to Austria, was a guy called Miguel Serrano. Miguel Serrano was an ideologue of the Nazi Party. He was one of the earliest members of the Chilean Nazi Party. I have his records. And this guy was an ambassador all the way up to Allende's time. When Allende became president, he lost his job. So this guy was such a right-wing fanatic. But he believed that Hitler was the incarnation of a Hindu god. That's how whacked out this is, okay? He believed that Hitler was the incarnation of a Hindu god, an avatar of a being called the Kalki. The Kalki is supposed to come out of Shambhala at the end of the world and lay waste to the enemies of the Kalki, lay waste to the enemies of Hinduism. Serrano believed that Hitler was this incarnation, that the swastika was the emblem of this, that it showed that this was who Hitler really was. He was a friend of the Dalai Lama until he died, Serrano. He was a friend of all the Nazis in Chile. He held a Nazi memorial service for Walter Rauff when Walter Rauff died peacefully in his bed in Santiago. Walter Rauff was the man who invented the mobile gas van. He was the guy who was in charge of going through North Africa looking for Jewish communities to have them exterminated. The guy was an absolute fanatic Nazi. But he lived out his days peacefully in Chile. They all were at Colonia Dignidad, including people like Hans Ulrich Rudel, who was Hitler's favorite pilot, the ace pilot, who really ran a lot of Odessa's operations, along with Otto Skorzeny, the famous commando. These guys are running ops all over the place, you know, and Chile was striking this way. It was a chill in that country under Pinochet. People would walk in the streets and you could hear a pin drop downtown Santiago. There was no noise. No one spoke. You know, you would go into a restaurant. There was dead quiet. People were afraid to speak. The waiter could be an agent for Pinochet. So no one said anything.
Why?
It was the strangest, most surreal experience.
Through all of this, there's one thing that there must be a conclusion for you. Not only with South America, Central America too as well, the United States, the secret space program, everything that. Why did our government allow all of this to happen? They allowed Chile and Argentina to exist. They allowed paperclip to happen. They supported all of this. They didn't infiltrate anything down there to go and retrieve or prosecute or persecute anybody. None of that happened.
None of it happened. No.
So why? Why did we let it go and continue to?
I mean, it could be something as simple as the fact that it was, they saw it as a Manichaean struggle between light and darkness. That, well, look at the Vatican. The Catholic Church was instrumental in helping Nazi war criminals escape. Now, I know that's a very controversial point of view. People have tried to debunk it, but it's impossible to debunk.
Right.
I talk about it in Unholy Alliance and in Ratline, that the documentation is overwhelming. The Catholic Church had a vested interest in protecting Nazis because the Nazis were anti-communist. They were against atheism. They were going to defeat atheism, and the church had to make a deal with the Nazis. There were very many pro-Nazi cardinals, bishops, priests, monsignors, everyone. You know, there was money flowing in that direction. There were safe houses all over the
passports world. Created, paperwork allowed for safe passage
yes.
on behalf of
fake
the
passports,
Vatican.
Fake identities.
Sure.
You know, all of this was going on. The guy who wound up in Indonesia that I write about, I knew from about 2 years ago when I wrote Ratline that he had the name and address of the Croatian priest who was instrumental in getting the Nazis into Argentina. I mean, everybody knew who these people were. They had the addresses of the safe houses in Rome and in Genoa. The Catholic Church was instrumental in this. Juan Perón of Argentina, was a dedicated anti-communist, a pro-Nazi, and a very Catholic guy, a very religious guy. Mm-hmm. Franco in Spain, very Catholic, very anti-communist, very pro-Nazi. You know, that went together. It all went together. This is how it worked. If you were against the Soviet Union, it was polarized. You had to be one or the other.
Right.
If you were anti-Nazi in the United States during the Cold War, you were suspected of being a communist. You couldn't be both anti-Nazi and anti-communist. It basically wasn't possible. And those politicians who tried were routinely attacked and destroyed if they came out speaking out against both. You just couldn't do it. You had to be anti-communist and just shut up about the Nazis. You know, and that's what you were supposed to do.
Scary, isn't it?
So I think it is very scary. And we sold our soul. We compromised our beliefs at that point. That's when it really happened. And we're having a hard time getting back that credibility because of this.
What are you doing next? I know you're going to come back and visit us once the book is out. Are you, now that you've surfaced again, are you going to be doing any speaking?
Oh, I don't know. Possibly. This is the first I've done.
Yes.
So this is breaking the logjam, maybe. So we'll see. You know, I'll try. You know, I'll be available, or I'll try to make myself available. I'll be trying to promote, of course, the Hitler legacy that's coming out and all of that. But basically just promoting the story in general, the one that we've been talking about, which I'm still fascinated by. It's got so many connecting points. And then at the end, it's only, like you say, a handful of people. It comes down to the same handful of people all the time.
Well, I thank you for choosing not only Fade to Black in this show, but Dark Matter to come out for the first time and speak about all of this. It's been great. It's been wonderful. I can't wait to get you back. And I know that we've just barely. We could do this. We could do this for a couple of weeks. Maybe we should.
Well, yeah, actually.
Thank you.
Well, I'm glad, and anytime you want me back, I'll make myself available. I'll resurrect again.
Absolutely, Peter. And all of Peter's books, everything is there, sinisterforces.info, and the websites are there at jimmychurchradio.com. Peter Levenda, everybody, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You have a great night.
You too.
Peter Levenda. Wow. I don't know what to say. I'm beside myself. Woo! That is why you come to Fade to Black.
I can't. I'm brain dead. Everybody, I'm just going to blast through this. I'm looking now. I'm looking at the tally, 840 tweets on my personal page, and they blasted by tonight. Thank you for all of the good questions. Thank you, Eugene. Great questions tonight. Everybody came through. I'm reading Ken Lipson. Wow, 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 wow. Great show, Jimmy. Yes, absolutely. Unbelievable. And I want to, this is something I want to drive home here. I've got about 1 minute, 2 minutes left. One of the things I want to drive home, and you can certainly go back and go to his presentation. I think it's in Amsterdam on the secret space program. It does jump back and forth, but he lays it out really well. Go back. Well, listen to this program again, because this one got a little bit deeper, and we did go left and we did go right quite a bit. But I have watched that seminar so many times, and the research that Peter Levenda has done over the years spans continents. It spans the world. And the way that he has tied everything together, and this is the fascinating thing, and I want everybody to digest this. The heart of it all was that church in the Bronx. And he had no idea as a young man working for that church that he literally grew up next door to. It was next door to where he lived in the Bronx. That all of this would be tied to not only back to Kenneth Arnold and Maury Island in 1947 and UFOs, to the Nine, to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, to the Kennedy assassination, to von Braun, to our space program, to the lack of us beating the Soviets into space. All of this, Oswald, all of this, Bell Helicopters, all of this, Bell Aerospace, is tied together with just a couple of dozen people. J. Edgar Hoover, all the way to Kennedy, and Dewey, and the administration, and Truman. It is one of the craziest stories ever. And yes, Peter Levenda unraveled it all for you tonight here on Fade to Black. It's an absolutely incredible story. And I got to say, I love my job. Thank you, Fadernauts. Thank you for hanging out tonight. Thank you for investing your time. Our family here with Fade to Black is just unbelievable. And happy birthday to Walanda. Thank you, Peter Levenda. That was extraordinary. His first show in years was done right here. Stay tuned. Coming up next is the Unexplained and then Expanded Perspectives. Special thanks to Keith Rowland and Art Bell, Fade to Black's executive producer, Dorita Kamarian. Show is produced by Hilton J. Palm and Mark D. Kovar. Special thanks to Leslie Johnson III. Fady is done by Dale Romero. Graphics by Method of Signaling. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Viteau, and Mark D. Kovar. Music is by Doug Aldrich. Intro by Spaceboy. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Dark Matter Radio Network. I am your humble host, Jimmy Church. Tomorrow night, Dr. Heather Lynn. I am out of here. See ya.